We were finishing up before the tour that we had to get to on parental abductions. And Miss Lance was here with us. We had pretty much, I think, finished up on that front committee. We could certainly come back to Miss Lance if we have a question. So please don't hesitate to do that. But I do want to, on that front, come to public comment, unless there's anything for the good of the order before we do that. Are we good, committee? Okay, let's keep going. Let's go to public comment on parental abductions. Is there public comment? Okay, please come forward. Thank you for being here. We are streaming, so I would ask that you get close to the microphone and introduce yourselves for us. Okay. Thank you for your patience and appreciate you staying over. Oh, little button, we need it. You need a green light there at the bottom. There we go.
Good.
Nice and close
We're
to the
going to
microphone.
learn.
There we go. Good deal.
So, Mr. Chairman, I do appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to speak on a slightly different front on this topic. And I appreciate our Representative Rodriguez Williams for putting this on the agenda and having it accepted for comment and testimony.
We appreciate her too. So
I bet you do. She's
Yeah.
a great lady. I am Julie Snelson. I'm going to use some notes off my phone. I apologize, so I don't ramble too much. I'm Julie Snelson. I was born and raised in Wyoming. I was born and raised, in fact, in Cody, Wyoming, which is where we presently reside. I own a realty company, Peaks to Prairie Realty. I'm a broker owner. This is my husband, Fred. He spent most of his career in healthcare. He's a licensed addiction therapist, licensed professional counselor, was director of the Chemical Dependency Center in Cody for a career, graduated with a master's from the University of Missouri. And once he retired, he came to work at my realty office with me. So that's what we both do now. I have appreciated the testimony so far, and it's become really clear to me that we're talking about two topics that are directly related, but also different. Our testimony may more correctly be termed interference with parental child contact. And I did take that off of the notes that were provided on Montana statute called interference with parent-child contact. It's certainly a form of parental abduction, but it's much different than a parent who removes a child from the state and even from the country, like the case we heard of Costa Rica. I would say that this could lead to that quite easily, but to be clear, that's not our testimony. I want to bring a different perspective because I think it's also an important conversation. And I want to talk about the real life reality of what is in place currently in Wyoming and how it does not protect the children that are caught in the middle of this. So this is our story. Our granddaughter is 6 years old. And so we are the grandparents. And I'm going to try very hard not to say her name, okay? Since we are recording and stuff. So I'll refer to her as either our granddaughter or maybe SMA, which is her initials that are used in court. And I hope I don't slip. So our background, there was a custody case that was heard in the Wyoming courts while all parties resided there. And it's in the court of Judge Overfield. And due to laws between states, it will remain in her court until our granddaughter is 18 years old. Her and her mother now reside in Montana. You'll hear me refer to that. That's why I want to make that clarification due to work. And the father agreed to this move. This was not an adverse move because of her job. So as I said, this is our story, or maybe more correctly, our granddaughter's story, but she's too young to have a voice yet. She will someday, but for now, we're her voice. And this is greatly abbreviated in the interest of time. I'm going to tell you just about one incident primarily. But I would say it started in August of 2019. The first time her father and his girlfriend took her from a daycare and hid her and cut off all communication. At the time of this incident, SMA had never lived without her mother, never lived a day without her mother. She was almost 3 years old, and this was court hearing number 1, an emergency hearing that only took 2.5 weeks to get to court. She was, of course, immediately returned to her mother. There were no repercussions for the father other than good scolding by the judge. Not that that's nothing. Since then, there have been 2 other incidences, and I'll speak a little bit about the one that we just went through. In 2020, end of 2022, beginning of 2023, her father was to have her for 8 days for the last half of Christmas break per the custody order. She should have been returned January 2nd because school started January 3rd. She attends St. Francis Catholic School in Billings, Montana. He did not return her. This time it took 45 days to get a hearing. This time she missed 26 days of school. This time she was older. They told her story she believed. They told her her mother moved and left her, and they told others in the community this too. This was an absolute falsehood, or more bluntly, a lie. She was allowed approximately during that 45 days 4 FaceTime calls. They were supervised. And if something was said that they didn't like, they cut it off. She did not see her baby brother. She did not see her mother, and she did not see us, her grandparents, for that 45-day period of time. We reached out even to ask for a telephone call, and we're not allowed it. We lived with sleepless nights and a feeling of hopelessness because the only remedy was a court hearing, which was 45 days out. No amount of calls to law enforcement, the county attorney, DFS, or any other authority could change this reality. That's because presently our county attorney looks at this as a civil matter. We stood outside the house where she knew she was with a police officer during one of these, and he called the county attorney's office, and he wanted to use the statute of interference with custody, and our county attorney said it was a civil matter and that this was not covered by interference with custody. So this time she was finally returned to her mother. She ran up to her almost in total disbelief and excitement. I wish I had a video of that to show you, because this is really about children, innocent children, and ultimately the damage that's done to children. He was found in contempt of court, which he was found in contempt of court every time. Contempt of court being just a sentence in the custody or the docket, whatever you call it, at the end. When she gave her ruling, she would call him in contempt of court, but there was no penalty. This time was the first time there was a penalty. The penalty was he would pay our attorney fees, which was $4,000. So maybe that'll make a difference. But the damage can't be quantified with money. That's what I want to say really clearly, is he's paying $4,000. She's paying the price. She came back having crazy nightmares, exhibiting signs of anxiety, sadness, and anger. She will have to do summer school. She's struggling in so many ways. The child that left for Christmas break was not the same child on February 7th. This can be verified with the school that she attends. So my question is this, as a citizen of Wyoming, a grandparent, Why does a court order signed by a judge regarding the custody of a child mean nothing in Wyoming? Why should a family have to spend $20,000 to see that the court order is followed? Why is a child that's totally innocent subjected to this kind of treatment? She has suffered emotional abuse. It's not like physical abuse. DFS doesn't get involved because it's a civil matter. It's not easy to prove, but we should be concerned that the result will show its face 10 plus years from now. And Fred will speak very briefly to that. Sadly, our nightmare has not ended. He knows that he can take her because when he does it, he says straight to our face, there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's very blatant. A judge who hears a custody case is able to take all the facts presented and make a decision they feel is in the best interest of the child. Of course, something could change that and a modification might be required. In an emergency, DFS can be called and asked to step in and remove a child from a home. And that would need to, be in statute, that's still an opportunity. If a father keeps a child or a mother keeps a child that's in danger, we don't want to see that go away, but there has to be some in-between ground here. Due to the fact that our granddaughter's only 6, educational neglect did not come in to play, just as a matter of fact. Educational neglect starts at the age of 7, but anybody in the educational system today knows that early childhood education is extremely important. As I said, our granddaughter attends St. Francis in Billings. She is in kindergarten. She was missed the cutoff by just a couple of days, so she's a kindergartner. By the end of kindergarten, they expect her to do simple reading, sentence writing, math, addition, and subtraction. She will have to have assistance in learning this summer, only he gets summer custody. He did lose 30 days, and he is not concerned about her education, so that probably won't happen. We'll have to make sure it happens some other way. And the alternative is for her to be a 7-year-old kindergartner. Add that all up by the time they get out of high school, 19 years old. And it won't fall on her father's shoulder to make sure she catches up in her education. It just won't. In conclusion, I'd say this. Our system and laws should protect children better, and this is broken. You have the opportunity to fix it. Other states have these laws. They're simple. I've never spoken to one police officer, and we've spoken to several. This is our 3rd time, who didn't express how frustrating this is to them. They would always say, I wish I could help you, but our hands are tied. They see the need for some kind of change so that child custody agreements hold some authority.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And what I hope to do is help you understand why, in my opinion, the civil law system is not a deterrent to situations like the one that was just described, and why we need a criminal statute to address interference with custody. On February 7th this year, our granddaughter's father was found in contempt in Judge Overfield's court for withholding his daughter from the mother for 45 days. Now, you would think that that would be a deterrent. You would expect a person who had that sanction to behave themselves at least for a while. The next day, the father called the Billings Police Department to request a welfare check on his daughter. So he weaponized the Billings Police Department. The Billings Police Department did their job, and they sent a uniformed officer to the kindergarten class in the religious school that my granddaughter attends to make sure she was safe. That experience first terrified her, and afterwards totally humiliated her. 9 days later, the father and his girlfriend traveled to Billings, Montana, where they arrived at the school determined to have lunch with our granddaughter. The school does not allow this, but they also knew that she had a counseling appointment immediately after the end of the school day. So they showed up at the counseling center prior to the beginning of the appointment, went into the counselor's office. Their behavior was so erratic that she called all the other counselors in the counseling center and told them to send their clients home. When my daughter got there with her granddaughter, the girlfriend got in her face, those are the counselor's words, got in my daughter's face. She let everyone know that she had her phone on record, and she tried to goad my daughter into a physical confrontation so that she could film it. Just incidentally, the fact that she had a recording device in a counseling center is a HIPAA violation. My granddaughter then retreated into the playroom out of the counselor's office and into the playroom, where she was later found hiding under a blanket, screaming and crying. My daughter and granddaughter left the counseling center, and the father and his girlfriend tried to leave by the door closest to the parking lot so that they could intercept them. He was told by a staff member that that door is not a public exit, it's for emergencies only. And he responded to that, well, I could just break the effing door down. So finally, he did leave through that door. Meanwhile, my granddaughter's counselor arrived at my daughter's car crying, fearful for their safety, and they left. The father and his girlfriend then followed my daughter across the town of Billings to their home address, where there was already a trespass order against him. And at that point, they were contacted by the Billings Police Department and left. This all happened within 9 days of being found in contempt of court. The trauma experienced by our granddaughter in the 45 days she was separated from her mother, and then the 9 days that followed, continues to impact her learning. But this kind of repeated traumatic experience can mark people's personal adjustment and their relationships for years. We had a brief conversation with Attorney Lance when we broke for lunch, and I certainly appreciated her testimony here this morning. And part of my takeaway from that conversation is this: in our current statute, the affirmative defense that is offered to parents under certain circumstances in the real world amounts to this. If a parent is willing to say to the court, I believe my child is in danger, they can do what they want. And they know that. And our granddaughter's father knows that. And so I'd like to quote from page 3 of your memorandum, part of the Montana law. In Montana, a person who has been granted parent-child contact under a parenting plan commits interference with parent-child contact if the person knowingly or purposely prevents, obstructs, or frustrates the rights of another person entitled to parent-child contact under an existing court order. That's what has happened in our family 3 times. And I'd like to suggest to you that it might be a reasonable option to move in that direction for a new statute for our state. and to move this into the criminal code instead of leaving it in the realm of a civil action.
Julie and Fred, thank you. Appreciate you hanging in there with us and really appreciate your testimony. My heart goes out to you and your family. Questions? Questions for the Selsons? Okay, any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, so the father of SMA lives in Wyoming, is that right?
That is correct.
And she lives in Montana now.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I need to thank you.
So lacking questions from anyone else, I guess I'm trying to wrap arms around why the law in Montana can't help. I guess
Oh,
when you stated that the case is stuck in a Wyoming court, is that the hinge point? Is that?
Yes. Mhm.
it is, Mr. Chairman, and that might help to clarify also for you, Representative Washut. Although our daughter lives in Billings, this custody case and any action on this case will remain in Wyoming until our granddaughter is 18. So it's just as if she still lived in the state.
Okay, thank you.
And that has to do with laws between states. And I'm assuming that's so that you can't just move from state to state and get away from a custody order by a judge in Wyoming. So the judge in Wyoming, Judge Arthur Young, she could be the judge the whole entirety of this until she turns 18 years old, no matter where she lives. The only time that changes
Sure.
is if the parents agree that it can go to a court in another state. And then only if both parents reside in that other state. As long as one parent resides in Wyoming, the case will remain in the Wyoming courts.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, folks, thank you. We reserve the right, if you can stick around for a few more
Yes, we
minutes,
will.
to throw a question at you if something comes up. So
Yes.
thank you very
And
much.
I would further say if there is study of this further, we will make ourselves available for other meetings, personal meetings. When we did sign on in, I did put our names and our email address and telephone number. If somebody would rather speak one-on-one and not in a public forum, we are available for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Really,
you.
Mr.
really
Chairman.
appreciate you. Well, the good senator from Evanston has a
Yeah.
question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just something it just popped into my head, and I don't know if this is even something you've thought about, but has there been any thought by your daughter or yourselves to maybe revisit the custody, the original custody of, with the background that this father, with all the issues he's had? Have you thought about that?
Yes, we actually are, due to the actions afterwards, which also hold him possibly in contempt of court, we have another hearing May 30th. And then at that time, we can determine whether to just revisit the whole entire. It's difficult. Our granddaughter loves her father. Let me just say that.
Mhm.
It is not our desire to remove him from her life. He's an important part of her life. Our desire is for him to follow the custody order.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, well, let's see if there's any other public comment. Is there any other public comment on the parental abductions discussion we're having today? Oh, Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to actually ask a question of our attorney. So we see in this document, the Montanas, and I would understand from conversation this morning that that would be contempt in Wyoming. If that case is still pending, if I understood correctly, it's being held in Wyoming also. Because one of the parents still lives here.
So there was a contempt case February 7th. He was held in contempt due to his actions after that. There is now another contempt case, but that one was decided February 7th. He was held in contempt of court, but it took 45 days. That's our problem is she missed 26 days of school. If she's in third grade and misses 26 days of school, or fourth grade or fifth grade, it gets more and more egregious as time goes on. And kids, she had no education. They locked her in the house so nobody could take her. I mean, it was sad, but that's our problem, is the length of time it takes to get before a judge. Just to be clear.
Thank you for that, Ms. Nelson. I appreciate it. Brian, I'm going to look over at the professional table, and who do I have?
I'll answer this one.
Thank you so much.
Chairman Landon, members of the committee. So the contempt would be a separate option from this criminal statute under Wyoming law. So the court would have a couple options: civil contempt, criminal contempt. Then you have the criminal statute, and then you have sort of the remedies under these civil laws. I don't know if that gets at what you're asking.
Katie, thank you. So Representative, does that, how about a follow-up?
Yeah, just slightly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So would that have to be brought, and since it turned to a criminal, is the county attorney the one that would have pressed the other issues, say neglect of education or any other part there that would rise to the criminal level?
Chairman Landon, Representative Jennings, no, the contempt proceedings would generally happen through the child custody case. And then if a criminal case is going to be brought, it's going to be by the district attorney or county prosecutor. And so something that we have this criminal statute for interference with custody that would have to be brought by the prosecutor. One thing is that there's only the felony offense in Wyoming, whereas in Montana, there's a couple of options for felonies, misdemeanors. So there's some variation in some other states as to sort of how they get at the criminal issue.
Hope that helps. Follow up.
Yeah, thank
Representative,
you,
go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. So did it rise to the level of felony? Did I hear you say that once it went to contempt and stuff like that, it rises to the level of felony in Wyoming, but not in Montana?
No, Chairman Landon, Representative Jennings. So those would be separate issues. So the interference with custody is a completely separate criminal issue that would be brought by the prosecutor, as opposed to contempt, which the district court can order through those child custody proceedings. So separate remedies.
So thank you for that. Representative Chesty.
So we're into an area here, I think we would need to do more, or your attorneys would need to do more research. I'm not going to ask you for an opinion on this because it requires more research, but it occurs to me that he's violated the Montana statute, even though the parenting order may have come from Wyoming. And that's the research question. Can a Wyoming parenting order form the basis for a crime in Montana? He could be prosecuted in Montana potentially. Now, whether he'd ever be extradited for that, I don't know. At least he could never go back to Montana for fear of getting arrested in Montana. But that's just a question that I had that would need some more research.
So committee, thank you. I think what I'd like to do, we have kind of completed testimony on the parental abduction piece. We do have somebody online. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Emily. I didn't think we did. Let's go to further testimony right now. And once we get done with public testimony committee, we'll stay on this topic and decide if we want anything done in these terms, and then we'll move on to the other two bullet points from the morning. So good afternoon, Ms. Muir.
Good afternoon.
Good to see your smiling face.
I wish I was there in person. Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman and the committee members. I'll be brief. I'm the Public Policy Director with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. I think it was Representative Jennings who said family law is one of the the hardest things out there, and it is. You're seeing reality right now. We do need more tools in Wyoming to help with the dear family from Cody, who has an awful experience, especially across state lines. We work with survivors every day, and we have a very specific civil legal program where we represent survivors of domestic violence. I asked our program attorneys, how often did they see this problem, if at all? I could have guessed the answer. They see it a lot. And they say very similar things that the Cody family said. That, sorry, I've got a dog in the room, that in the civil case, the length of time to get before a judge means there's harm to the children, trauma is happening. The length of time is what's causing some of those problems. We're very interested in the Uniform Child Abduction and Prevention Act, specifically because it complements one of our laws we already have on the Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act. And it's a separate act because it very narrowly focuses on these abductions, these interferences with child custody. And I think we too need to do some more research and hear from many of our neighboring states. Montana and Idaho do not have this uniform law, but Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, and South Dakota have it. But it allows the court, even on its own review, to look at the risk factors of someone who might abduct the children. And I only bring in domestic violence here because so often the abusive parent says, you will never see your children again if you leave me. And so a survivor may want to plunge into this family law arena. That is the hardest thing that goes on in our courts. And she or he is confronted with just a nightmare of jurisdiction. If someone is taken across state lines, our attorneys just echo, it takes forever to get in front of the judge. And it's really frustrating, not just for the survivors who are very afraid of what's happening, but for those children. And that's where the harm is. I'm happy to take questions if you have any. I also have a statistic sheet from the missing and exploited children's work that I'll email to all of you. It just kind of shows that most abductions of children are by family members. Usually it's mom or dad, and it's these cases. So you've waded into a tough area. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Ms. Muir, thank you. Really appreciate the work you do, and thanks for taking time to be here this afternoon as a resource. And you're right, family law is tough. Any questions for Ms. Muir this afternoon? Okay, thank you very much, Tara. If you stick around, we may reserve the right to throw a question at you. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, I think that does complete public testimony. No, please come forward. Absolutely. Good afternoon. You would please state your name for us and.
There it goes. I'm chairman of the Sheridan County Republican Party, and my name is Brian Miller. And the story you just heard, and I'm here actually on behalf of the party in one piece, but as a citizen in the other part. The story you just heard is a sad one. And it's obviously, this entire issue is obviously something that goes well beyond legislative needs, goes into social needs and a whole lot of other areas. And parental rights and limitations to them are really big topics, and they cross multiple areas. And so you have a big job in front of you as you go into this and in other areas dealing with parental rights. I'll start off one way, but I'll end up moving into more along the lines of what the folks who just spoke, both sets who said as I get done here. One of the things that I'd like to talk about is in our last Central Committee meeting here in Sheridan County, we passed a resolution on parental rights in education. So it's another one of those areas that's out there. It mirrored Senate File 117, which, as you all know, passed out of the Senate, and however was never made it into the House because the Speaker chose not to bring it up. I bring that up only for one reason, because in that bill, the testimony or the reason that it didn't get in is because that was considered a local issue. Some of these things are not local issues. What you're dealing with today is probably not a local issue. And so I'm happy to see that you're dealing with it. But I caution you as you go into it to tread on parental rights lightly. Here, yeah, I'll just move on to that. So when it comes to the resolution that we did, I'll just provide an electronic copy of it for you so you guys can see that down the line. And I won't go into that here today. But that said, I'd like to ask you to consider this when you're looking at legislation, the penalties that we do have for parents doing what you heard in the previous story said. Penalties, increasing the penalties on those is one of the things that you can certainly do, and you can certainly do rather quickly, and making those mean something. If someone violates a court order and there's no penalty to it, they'll do it again and again. We see it in a whole lot of areas. We see it in the political realm. We see it in especially when it comes to abuse of children and when it comes to abuse of spouses. Making a penalty harsh enough that it actually has an impact is something you could do rather quickly. But again, as I say, creating new legislation that is not just building on what already exists, because it may not be the way to go. Parents who fail to follow court orders are certainly not the standard, but it happens far too often. It happens often enough that the children really suffer. And so it takes, and I know it takes time to get through the courts. It takes time to make things happen. But as someone noted, if these move into a criminal law versus the civil penalty law, it might happen a little bit faster, and it might happen to the point where people actually start paying attention. So I ask you to look into that. So the one thing I do want to say to end this is please don't create more laws just to make laws, just to make people feel better about it. If you're going to work on this and you need to, make sure that those laws will have teeth. Make sure that what is done and what the courts can say needs to be done and what law enforcement can do to enforce it can be done, and that it can be done quickly. Otherwise, it's the child who ends up suffering the most. Sure, the adults suffer, but the adults are the ones that actually put the kids in these scenarios. So I have a whole lot less compassion for the parents who put their kids in these conditions than I do the children. So having the parents take the brunt of the heat when they do something like this, I'm all for it. But I will leave you with just, I caution you adding a whole bunch of new limitations on parents out there, but certainly make the penalties fit. And I'll take any questions you have.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, in the previous testimony, we heard that Wyoming state statute doesn't address educational neglect until the age of 7. And I'd be curious if you would support any change in that law to make it lower as far as age goes.
Mr. Miller?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rodriguez-Williams, I certainly, I'd have to take a look and see exactly, what the law, how it would be enforced and what the law says. I've not done that. I will do that, and I'll send you a note and let you know. I don't like to comment on things that I don't at least have a general idea about. And I will say this in general, I would support going a little bit earlier than that, since we do say kids need to go to school through at least 8th grade. But I can't give you a solid answer until I've actually read the statute itself.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you for your time.
Any further public testimony this afternoon on parental abduction? Any further testimony? Did anyone show up online this afternoon for that? Okay, I will close public testimony. Committee, let's stay on parental abductions for a moment. What's your pleasure on this front? either some of the information that we went over this morning or to the issue that we've dealt with this afternoon, which I think is relevant. Representative Cheston, and then I'll come back to Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was interested in the conversation we had about the correct name, the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act. It does seem like there is a gap between the UC, the child custody jurisdiction. It doesn't go far enough in certain areas. The testimony was very interesting. I personally would like to see a draft of a bill to potentially enact the Uniform Child Abduction Prevention Act in Wyoming. I'm not yet committed to saying I would vote for it, but I want to see a draft to at least have some further conversation on it. I think there's something that it's a bill that has a law that's been adopted 14 places and a lot of our local jurisdictions, local agencies are in support of it. So I personally would like to see a further study of that in the form of a draft.
Representative, the way I've generally operated as a chairman of committees, that request really doesn't require any kind of motion or a majority of all of us to say, well, yes, that's something we want to do. I suspect there's several of us who have that same interest. And so if we could make that so, Brian, we would like to get a look at that. It strikes me, Representative, that what we just talked about might be a modification that we could make to that particular Uniform Act. We could talk about the education age. We could talk about this interference, the statute that's referenced in the state north of us. For example, both of those, maybe they would fit. If not, we may want to consider a separate draft for that, but thank you for that. Committee, anything else on this particular front? I promised to go back to Senator Cooper and then we'll go on down the line and back. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I look at this, I'm seeing three different issues here. We're talking about parental abductions, but we're talking about a lot of other things also. The parental abduction issue that would be addressed, in my understanding, with this Uniform Act would address abductions with a court order in place. And I think that's proper. The second part of this was the good folks from Cody addressed is custody interference, and they're two different things completely. And then thirdly, and the one that's really dangerous to me is when there is no court order in place and a parent takes their children and goes back home to wherever they may have came from, then we're messing with parental rights, and that's a pretty scary thing too, without a court order. So we got to be really careful where we step on that third boundary there, in my opinion. The second one, custody interference, that should be pretty cut and dried. I think there probably should be a pretty serious consequence to that, and the same way with abduction under a custodial order. But the third one is a very gray area, and it's something we really need to be very, very careful of.
thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. I think somebody had a hand up, and I think Representative Jennings did too. Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I too would like to see a draft. I'm wondering if the abduction draft could be broadened to include the interference with the court order. And there must be a definition of abduction. There must be, we might be able to add a definition of interference to make it fit in one bill. I don't know that, but I'm wondering if we could possibly look at that. Just asking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I like that suggestion. And Brian, I'm looking at you. maybe what we could couch that request under is just the notion that if it looks like those are issues that could be combined, we could look that way. And if it's something that you don't think, we could go with a separate draft with the interference piece.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we can look into that, and either, you know, the two concepts would either be presented to the committee at the next meeting in one bill draft or two. Ultimately, though, I will say it is the committee's will. You know, we can certainly provide our advice, but it is ultimately the committee's call on that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm good with that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator. We probably, Mr. Co-Chairman, I'm looking at you too. I would suggest that we might be better off to look at two drafts on this. It's a little bit of a reach on the interference piece to go with the abduction Uniform Act. That's just my knee-jerk observation.
Mr. Chairman,
You go ahead, Senator.
I've been thinking about that too, and you might be right, but it's sort of a continuum, you know.
Yeah.
You got it where the parents literally, one parent kidnaps the children, that's the kind of the abduction. But if you interfere with custody, you're at least temporarily doing the same thing. You may intend to return the children at a certain time, but you're interfering with the rights that have been derivated by the court. So it's sort of like, you know, if I don't return the children when I'm supposed to, or and so they're away another week versus they're abducted for a week, I'm having trouble. It seems like matters of degree here, and kind of fit in the same scale.
You know, and before I forget, committee, we had something brought up that I had also written down. Representative Rodriguez Williams pointed to that educational neglect piece. And I'm not sure, there's not very many children in Wyoming who don't start the formal education process by 5 years old. I don't really know hardly any young people who wait all the way till 7 years old. So I think that should be a piece of the draft on this interference piece. Further thoughts? Is there anything we're missing, committee members? Representative Jennings, did you still have something? We'll come back to the co-chairman.
I do, Mr. Chairman. So I don't have much issue with looking at the interference and that aspect of it, but I think we miss a piece here. We can write laws all day long, but if they're not followed, it doesn't really solve much. And so while I'm more than willing to look at some of these things, and even the draft of the Prevention Act, I think that gets us into a very scary area, and we become thought police when we ask the courts that are already in a very difficult position. But it seems to me like that we're missing a part of this puzzle, that in the case where we heard, the county attorney was not involved in doing a part of that interference. It became a criminal thing at that point. And so I look at that and I think, well, this is already on the books. So maybe we need to look at why are things like that not kicked up to the higher level of a criminal activity. And if it does become a criminal activity, in their case, 45 days. Well, there was interference and there was contempt. And so those things are already on. And I was going to ask Representative Oakley, because she'd have a firsthand experience in that. I'm sure it's not the same in every single county, but it just seems to me that part of our obligation would be oversight. And if the judiciary is having an issue here that we need to address, that when something moves from civil to criminal, and yet we kick it out 45 days. I mean, why? I mean, for me, I'm as interested in that part of this equation as I am in passing a new law, and I'm certainly not interested in passing a thought police thing, even if it's the courts that do it. They already work on these cases. And I don't want to make it harder for them, but I really puzzle over when it goes from civil to criminal, why these things are already on the books. So maybe it's not that we need to write a new law. We need to figure out why they're not being prosecuted as such and in a timely manner once it moves from civil to criminal. And I don't know if that's something that Representative Oakley would like to address. I know that there's backlog and I know that it's hard, but these are our children and parents' rights are involved. But once you move to the criminal side of that, if there's a problem in our system, we ought to be addressing that, it seems to me, as much as trying to write a new law.
I would, Representative, thank you. I would just suggest that sometimes it does take another law to broaden the foundation and to help our court system understand that, no, we actually mean this and we're going to make it, but we're going to put it in a criminal statute. But I look forward to the debate going forward. You're right. That's what we'll be talking about, second meeting and third meeting, if we have a couple of things drafted up. But Mr. Co-Chairman.
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, I think we heard some testimony that language regarding the affirmative defense within the existing criminal code on interference with custody was well intended, but might have some adverse consequences. And so I would hope that when we get the bill draft, we take a look at what kind of affirmative defense language are we going to put in the next bill. That might be part of the problem. But the other thing that strikes me is this is, in my time on judiciary, this is at least the second, if not third time where we've had cases come before us where people are saying, you know, the judge has authority, because my understanding under contempt, the judge does have authority to put down some pretty significant penalties. Did impose $4,000 fine, but stopped there. And I think the judge can order jail time on contempt. And we see the same thing that previously on the DUI blood draw warrants, where a judge would issue a search warrant and then different practitioners would refuse to draw blood if the offender wasn't completely compliant. And the best we were getting was some type of interference with a peace officer violation. And it seems that the judge has power in some of these cases, whether we're talking civil court and parental rights cases or DUI blood draw cases. Judges have power, but they just seem resistant to use it sometimes. And I don't know that the legislature can change that or fix that.
It is a different branch of government. Representative Oakley.
Thank you,
Afternoon.
Mr. Chairman. So I agree with a lot of the angles that Representative Jennings is identifying. And I think that's kind of key to this, is that they are in separate angles and different places. So first, as far as interference with custody, saying that there is already a law in the book and there is, one of the things I note is it's a 5-year felony in Wyoming. So that's going to, it does exist and it's very similar actually. But when you start looking at that level of punishment, right, that's not going to be something that's just that's brought simply or easily. And also then when you start talking about the 45 days, I mean, we're really good relative to other states, but speedy trial is 6 months in Wyoming and often felonies get continued past that. So when you start talking about that 45 days, if you're bringing in a criminal case, that's not going to necessarily speed this up or answer it like that, which is, of course, I think one of the things you're trying to get to is how could it immediately be addressed? And so in that, then as we've discussed also with contempt, there are two types of contempt. So you've got this court order and they can be found in civil contempt because of that not following that order. They can also be found in criminal contempt, which then has to be prosecuted like a crime, because then it is held to that standard of a criminal standard. The standard of a civil contempt is clear and convincing evidence and goes in front of the court. So those are both options. They also have due process and, and those type of issues. The criminal probably taking longer is going to have to be prosecuted by, by the county attorney or the prosecutor. So, but that is a possibility to do that. So we do have civil contempt. We do have criminal contempt on the books. We do have interference with custody on the books. And when we talk about this then we say, whatever we do, we're affecting parents' rights. And of course, that's key, that's already exists. And it does affect both parents' rights, right? I mean, the thing about these that are just difficult and will always be difficult is we talked about family law being difficult, and you can bring the two separate sides, and I promise you, you'll get different stories. Right. And they adamantly and very much will be, I mean, it is emotional. It is as personal as it gets when you're dealing with children. So finding the right balance isn't always easy. People want it immediate, and I get that. Unfortunately, it's not always how it works with courts, and the idea that the criminal law is going to make it happen immediately, I don't think that gets you there either, because of due process. So it's a good discussion, but there are a lot of angles here as far as contempt and criminal and civil remedies. And the reality is, in some form, we do have all of those currently.
Thank you, Representative. That it's very well stated. It's a deep pool of water that we're swimming in, and good point made on the criminal front in terms of this wouldn't necessarily speed it up. But the piece that it fixes for me in my mind is it makes my blood boil when somebody tells me a story about an individual who says there's not a damn thing you can do to me when I do this. What we talked about this afternoon with our friends from Cody is something we have to fix. I don't want some young girl to go through this again. And I get it. It's difficult. Good points made, but I want to at least try something and debate something to see if we can't do a little bit better on this interference piece. I don't think that's adequate. I don't want families to go through that. And so if that does exist, then maybe we have to talk about something else, which is a sit down with our friends in another branch of government or whatever it might take. But anyway, so I think we've hit on a couple of things that will give us an opportunity, committee, to continue this debate. Representative Oakley, follow up? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, not to belabor, but I forgot to address the thought police. Going to switch into the Uniform Child Abduction Act. So I appreciate what he's saying as far as the thought of prevention being can be a slippery slope. I would say, regardless of that word, one of the reasons that I did like it is because it's an evidentiary hearing in front of a judge, so there is due process. And so what this says, and what the judge is specifically assessing, is if there's a credible risk of child abduction. So if they have to make a finding that they're in this specific instance, again, with sometimes a lot of noise that can happen with these cases, the judge, hears and says there is a credible risk. And then after that evidentiary hearing can do things that I would suggest aren't particularly onerous, as far as during the pendency of that, right? The travel restrictions, passport restrictions, things like that. That would just be for that period of time where the judge found that there was a credible risk of child abduction. So it's narrower and tighter, I think, than that. So I just wanted to say that as far as in relation to this possible Uniform Child Abduction Act.
Thank you, Representative. You know, it's, and from a 30,000 foot view, we all know it because we're legislators, but legislatures often aren't very good about being proactive. We're much better at being reactive. So that just goes without saying, but anything else on the parental abduction piece that committee that you'd like to see, or any further information our staff can help us with? Representative Jennings?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, again, I'd like to see us explore that idea that a lot of these things, as the good counselor said, are on the books, and yet we don't see them being used. I'm with you, you know, this is kind of a heart-rending thing. We don't want to see that happen again. But if there's things already on the books, why aren't they being used? Have we left aside a resource or something here that we've, I mean, children are our best resource. So have we left a resource out that the executive branch needs to prosecute this? I mean, I understand that we want to do something, but if there are things, if there are remedies already available, and testimony seems to say that they're not being used, why aren't they? And so I would like to see us come back with, you know, our staff maybe reaching out to the branch that goes after these things and say, hey, why don't we see as a 5-year penalty? And I think about the case that was brought forward here, and I'm not the judge sitting in front of that, but I'm thinking, boy, I'd be thinking about that. I wouldn't be thinking, well, $4,000 after on the third attempt is going to solve this. I'd be thinking, hey, these people need to maybe move into the criminal penalty part, and maybe we need to go down that road. Maybe there's some example setting that needs to be done. Have we done our part of providing whatever they need to prosecute the laws that are already on the books? Because it doesn't sound to me like they're doing it. And I'd like to know, do we have a part in that? Do we? And so maybe our staff could look into that a little more.
So Brian, maybe a little deeper dive or a little additional thoughts that you might give to that issue for us for the second meeting. Maybe anything that touches things like the interference piece or the abduction piece. Does that make sense? Is that something that you think?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the reality is, you know, you know, it's probably best to hear it from the source, you know, from that branch and from the county attorneys, their perspective on this statute. So
I was going to come to that as well. And I think that I would be interested in hearing from prosecutors and from county attorneys, and then I think we could sure pursue that, Representative. Good stuff. So, okay, let's Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, another thing that might be relevant here that could help us identify why the courts aren't wanting to move is case law, in terms of we have our constitutional law for parental rights. And if I were a judge, I'd be concerned about, you know, if I infringe on those and I move into criminal or whatever, is that an infringement on that constitutional right for parents? And if that's the case, you know, is this coming to the Supreme Court? Are there a lot of appeals? What does that look like? I think that would kind of help answer that question. Maybe the judicial branch can talk to us about that, or maybe we have some case law that can help point us in that direction.
Good points made. And I think what we will do, the co-chairman and I, put our heads together and see if we can't develop that second meeting agenda wise, so that it can help us to further understand. You know, that's kind of how the interim process works. So I look forward to that, and we'll go to work on that with you, Brian, and see if we can search out some angles that might be helpful. So let's climb up to the second bullet, the Internet Crimes Against Children Peace Committee. What's your pleasure on what we learned this morning from the Attorney General and others? Mr. Co-Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I think my big takeaway from the presentation we got this morning was that there's nothing that really needs addressed more so than staffing, that the internet crimes against children task force doesn't have the resources it needs presently to do the proactive investigations at the same time it's handling this upsurge in tip cases coming out of the National Center. And I think that the solution there is probably for this committee to recommend to the Joint Appropriations Committee that serious consideration be made when developing the Attorney General's budget to address that staffing issue. And that staffing issue is related to task force officer reimbursements. It's related to the number of agents that we have that are given that full-time responsibility to work in the internet crimes arena. And I think that would take us a long way down the road if we can bolster those resources. It sounds like they have the technology they need, but we also have that, sounds like a pretty limited resource in the forensic analyst. And boy, I sure hate to lose somebody like that who's going to be really hard to replace. And there was also some mention about wounded warrior staffed position within the operation there. And well, I'd like to learn more about that and maybe see if we can expand that participation of some of our veterans in this task. But that's my takeaway. It's a budget issue. I don't see that there's a lot to be done statutorily unless we wanted to look at perhaps upgrading some penalties. But that's my take.
I think in that regard, Mr. Co-Chairman, I think sometimes communication to our other committees can be valuable. And so we'll visit about that in the next meeting and see the flavor from the committee. But I sense that that's not a bad thing for us to encourage our appropriators to take a hard look at that. Startling number this morning was one of my takeaways. Granted, I think we're getting better at scrubbing platforms out across the country, but that's not all of it. And to see those numbers go from something like 200 up to nearly 800, that gets my attention. And so I think it's worth maybe continuing the visit. The department also indicated to us that they can bring some facts and figures back to us. Representative Rodriguez-Williams, you had that conversation this morning about that. I think it would be good to see some numbers and see what's going on. So if we could ask the department to do that, we'll take that up again, second meeting for a little bit of information sharing. So anything else on internet crimes? Representative Jennings.
I'm on a roll, Mr. Chairman, so I'd like to tag on to
Stay out of the way, boy.
the chairman's request for resources, and it's something that we didn't talk about with the director or the department, but maybe there's a place there also with the appropriations that we could run some sort of a informational thing. Listen, if you're distributing things to our children, we are coming after you. Some kind of information. I don't know what it'd say exactly like that, but you guys probably do. But maybe we could run, we take on the war on drugs. We do all kinds of other things. And this is our most valuable asset. So maybe we could ask for a little budget to a media campaign to let them know you're not going to get away with that in Wyoming. You are not going to go after our children and not expect us to come back after you.
Representative, some of that budget might also could be used to make sure that we're getting good information to every one of our school kids out there. I think good efforts have been made. And by the way, a tip of the hat to our professionals on staff for doing what they can to get out there to the schools, but there's 90,000 students out there. So Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two things. I look forward to hearing from Mr. McDonald as to what he collaborates with the AG's office on model language pertaining to the animated cartoon and the CGI images, clearing that up, that language. And then second, I wanted to see if we can make a request for a memo from LSO. And I don't know the answer to this question, but what it takes to be a forensic investigator. It seems like there's a shortage of them. And just curious what that education looks like, or potential adult career development type of opportunities that maybe we can create for law enforcement so that we can boost that profession. And perhaps it's something that our community colleges could support or not.
Thank you, Representative. You know, that reminds me that we talked right before lunch, and some of us talked during lunch about those platforms that allow for nefarious things to go on, and somebody to steal someone else's identity, ruin their lives, and by the time you get a handle on it, can't ever get some things back. And I'm just wondering, Brian, I wonder if you could help us by taking a look at, do we have adequate laws in place to handle a situation where someone's likeness is being used in an improper way? I have some real concerns about that. I shared this morning. I think given the climate and the culture that is going on in our world today, and I've read that other parts of the country are dealing with this. So I hope that, and it's not just children, I'm talking about adults, and you know, people can do some pretty horrible things to other people. Are we okay? Are we in position that we can prosecute that adequately and quickly and go after people? I'm just asking. Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things I think, obviously, we're talking a lot about education. This is the interesting part is 15 years ago, we wouldn't even have this conversation.
Right.
I mean, whenever I was in high school, I was 18 when I got my first phone, and you could do one thing with that, and that was make a phone call or T9. And that was it. But now this next generation is dealing with this, and not just children, it's adults as well. And so with that, also, I think a further conversation has to be educating the next generation of the potential that comes when you place those images online, the potential that comes whenever you just, oh yeah, I'll just friend that person. And so I think it's that continue. We just got done at this amazing girls' home. And you know, one of the things that just stood out to me as we toured that was all the things that they're doing to make sure to equip this next generation of young women to be able to stand up in society. And I think that's just something that we're charged with as the legislature. We're charged with as kind of the torchbearers for next generation, is that they have that education piece to understand. You might just post your vacation pictures, but that could come back to be a real big issue. So just be very careful and protect, and as parents protect, and as grandparents protect, and just that protection piece. So I think that also comes maybe with some funding that we're going to have to understand, that we have to be proactive in funding that to try to protect, so we don't see another huge increase in those calls.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. So Senator, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, my takeaway from the testimony on this issue this morning was not that our laws are inadequate. I didn't have a feeling about that. And I think the argument is, if we catch them, we get them, right, Representative Oakley? I mean, yeah, it's 100% rate. So maybe the number of investigators is inadequate. I certainly agree with this education piece. I don't even know how children negotiate this. That's a tough world. But I don't, you were asking staff or research memo on the adequacy of the laws. I'm not sure that's the issue, at least not what I got from anybody today. Maybe resources in different ways. Sometimes I worry if we ask staff for too much, but Brian's got big shoulders. He's got help.
Yeah, no, that's a good caution, Senator. Thanks. I just gave a lot of thought to that particular issue and wondered, I'm certain that we're probably okay and we can go after somebody if they steal Senator Cooper's likeness and take it on a horseback ride somewhere. Senator Cooper, you got something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to just kind of remind everybody that as we do this, we have to be very careful of a separation of powers between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and make sure that we're not over legislating. And one of the things that I'd like to ask the new director when we come back for the next meeting, I'd sure like to see a budget prepared so that for expansion in the internet crimes and also in the lab for what you actually need and how you intend to use that money. We kind of got scolded a little bit last year. We overrode the governor's veto, but he felt that there was an encroachment by the legislature into the executive branch on telling them how they had to spend their money. I would like for you to tell us how you're going to spend the money, and then we'll decide whether or not we can give it to you. I think would be a more appropriate way to handle that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just piggyback a little bit on the co-chairman. The staffing issue is the thing that comes to mind to me more important than anything else. Just that increase in the cyber tips. So many of these things are new. And so we may not have enough meat, in some of these statutes to deal with the revenge porn and the sex, they call it sextortion. Is that what they call it? See, I don't even know what it's called. But I mean, I think a lot of these things that are happening now with the increased access to the internet, and particularly with younger students, I do think we've got to have the resources and the staffing to take care of it. So that's my takeaway from the whole thing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. So let's go to the Attorney General's information provided this morning. Our sex offender registration, controlled substances. What do your notes say, committee? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would like to see what might be a relatively easy statutory fix, I guess, on two fronts. Getting rid of, and I know it'd be a reworking of the statutes because we do have that elemental, the last thing you do is pick the form. But I would like to see something where we change that and get rid of form as the element to choose. And also as it relates to this, it's probably just a phrase, I don't know, but the origin piece, what was the language about the naturally occurring? Is that right? So
versus synthetic, I think.
Versus synthetic. And my idea, of course, Mr. Fuller will be better at it than I am, but like this, then I think the idea would be just to remove that piece, then it would catch either. Rather than writing out naturally occurring or synthetic, right? I mean, Delta 8, it's an active form. What was it? And anyway, of THC, and if that's illegal, then that's what we're trying to catch, that unnecessarily limits it. So it would be the removal of that, I think. Hopefully that would get it. I guess we can look at it, but I would have those two suggestions as far as the controlled substance. Am I missing anything?
Couple of good interest points, and our professionals are still here. Thank you for that, by the way. So if we need to ask a question, we can, but one of the other states from way back east, we brought up that law this morning that pertains to this issue, and Brian, maybe you could look at that in tandem with that request. Regarding controlled substances, any other thoughts come out of that committee? that kind of hit a couple of points I had in my mind.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In my notes here, I definitely see a need for more staffing in the lab area. And again, I would ask the director in the same direction for a good guidelines for us. I don't think we have the expertise to say, well, we're going to give you 2 more people. I think we need to know how many people you need. And so we can help you properly. And that would be my direction on that.
So the vice chairman brings up something to our director. I would just ask if you might be willing to visit with us when we get together again. I think in September committee is our next meeting, but it gives a little time to kind of ponder, but we would value that, and we want to be in position to support, because you can tell the committee felt pretty strongly that we need to throw a little support behind you guys. Does that make sense, Director? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, anything else on substances, sex offender registration? Did anything jump out, committee? I think that was very good information. Staffers, thank you so much for all of that. I found it to be very valuable and informative. Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, my notes are a little cryptic here, but there was some discussion in the testimony about sex offender registration, that there was a definition in section 301 that probably could be removed. And then maybe adding some of these other classifications of other offenses to the sex offender registry statute.
Brian, would you be willing to opine on this topic? Did you hopefully have some notes on that too?
Mr. Chairman, what I understood the request to be from the Attorney General's office was twofold. First, removing a definition related to, I think, a criminal offense against a minor that's in 719-301. Second was the inclusion of 4 specific offenses in 719-302 that are not currently there, but are in that existing definition 301. I believe that was what they had presented to the committee.
Thank you for your help on that, Brian. I would appreciate if you work up a draft for us for the next meeting on that.
And Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence and the committee's direction, would it be okay to work with the Attorney General on this? I think there's a couple of decision points, namely, where do these 4 offenses go in 302?
Please do. And Brian, depending on where that goes, don't hesitate to reach back out, and the co-chairman and I can, get on the phone with you or whatever. So thank you. Anything else, committee? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for Mr. Fuller, and one that I probably should have asked this morning. I briefly hit on it, but I'm trying to understand why those offenses are included in this at all. Do you have legislative history on this, like felonious restraint, false imprisonment? It just seems like they're randomly stuck under the sex offender registration. What am I missing?
Mr. Fuller?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, that's not a question, that's not research I have done to this point, but we can certainly include that as part of this, the exploration of this topic. We can look into when that came into being and try to figure out where that came from in 301.
Yeah, appreciate it. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up for, I guess, the committee to think about, and maybe because I agree with Senator Case, not creating a bunch of work for Mr. Fuller, because I have to say, I'll look at it more, but it seems to me that the easiest way would be to simply strike those and strike them from 301 rather than adding it to anyway. I don't understand their inclusion. And to me, if I do further research and find out that's that's what I think at least, and I would submit to the committee that the easiest thing would be to just strike their inclusion, which wouldn't take a lot of research. So I just don't, you know what I mean? I don't want him to do too much work here.
Representative, do you mean taking something out of the statutes? That's a brand new concept. I want to write that down. 3:30. Okay, we've got to move on. Committee, thank you very much. I think we've got some good directives to the staff, and we better get moving. We've had people waiting. Let's continue with some law enforcement issues. If you need to take a break, please do it, but we're not going to go a formal way this afternoon. Unsolved murders. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Sorry to keep you a little while on this one, but thank you for your patience. Okay, thank you. Okay, we do have some folks online who will join us a little bit later too. So Director, take it away. If you reintroduce yourself and your colleagues, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ronnie Jones. I'm the Director of the Division of Criminal Investigation.
Good afternoon, Chairman. My name is Matt Waldock. I'm a commander for the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation.
Hey, afternoon, Chairman. My name is Scott McWilliams, the Deputy Director of DCI under the new director. And my position is management of the crime laboratory.
We've been talking about you this afternoon a little bit, Deputy Director. So take it away, Director.
Mr. Chairman, the three of us are going to be speaking about homicide investigations or unsolved homicides and cold cases. I will be handling the cold case portion. Commander Waldock will be talking about unsolved homicides in Wyoming and some statistics, as well as some case highlights from our cold case team. And Deputy Director McWilliams is here to answer any questions about forensic capabilities in our crime lab.
Okay, thank you.
In 2012, DCI, the director at the time, recognized a gap in the service that we provide to our criminal justice partners. And that was in the area of cold case investigations. He recognized at the time that we had an agency full of very talented and very experienced investigators who would be able to help with these types of cases. But we also had the resources available to be able to provide these services. So at that time, the cold case team was created. As we sit today, the resources we have available to work these cases, we have 37 sworn full-time agents in the state. 7 of these agents are assigned to the cold case team on a part-time basis. We currently have 23 task force officers, and of those 23, 14 of them would be available to assist on these investigations when needed. In the lab, we have 27 employees in the lab, 24 of them are scientists. We have 5 state-funded intel analysts around the state who would be available to help with these cases. And then, of course, we have the technical and scientific equipment, some crime scene equipment that's very expensive that the local agencies call on us often to use to help with crime scene investigations, as well as all of the equipment that the Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force has to be able to exploit digital evidence. The makeup of the team today, like I said earlier, we have 7 agents who are assigned to the team. Now, what that means is these 7 agents are assigned cold cases that we are requested to be the lead agency on. So those cases are distributed amongst those 7 agents. We have a team leader, a supervisor who runs the team. He's in charge of managing the caseload for the agents, the case assignments, and also, providing resources and, just making decisions for the team in a supervisory role. Again, like I said earlier, we have 14 task force officers that would be available to assist. Now, we don't have any task force officers that are permanently assigned to the team, but it's not uncommon for any one of those to be involved in any one of the investigations that we're actively involved in. We have one a DNA forensic scientist assigned to the team. She attends all of the meetings and provides not only almost 30 years of experience in DNA, but also a scientific perspective to the investigations, which often is very useful. We have one intel analyst. She's in Gillette, but she attends all of the meetings, and she is the main point of contact for any type of subject research or pattern of life or any type of intel work that needs to be done. She's the primary analyst that works on those cases, but the other analysts are also available to assist when needed. We have one FBI special agent who is assigned to the team. She is at every meeting as well. She provides input on the open investigations. She provides investigative support, but she also provides the team a conduit to the FBI resources, particularly the crime lab and the behavioral analysis unit, which we've used on a number of cases. So it's good to have that direct access to those resources as well. We recently added or re-added, I guess, a retired FBI agent to the team. He now works for NCMEC, but he was on the team prior to retiring and was a very, very skilled investigator. So he now is able to bring the resources of NCMEC to the team if and when they're needed, but he also provides years of experience to help with these cases. And then we also have the team leader, the supervisor of our fusion center also attends these meetings so he can provide any type of support to the cases that the fusion center may be able to provide. I would like to add the structure of the team is not rigid. There are the 7 members, but it is not uncommon to have other agents come to the meetings when they have, information to share or for whatever reason. So the structure is not rigid. The way we get involved in cold cases, we have to be asked to be the lead agency on any one of these cases. We don't have original jurisdiction in homicide cases in Wyoming. So, over the years, obviously the word has gotten out, which is good, that this is a project that we do, this is a team that we have, and that we are available. So that really happens one of 2 ways. Sometimes agencies will approach the team and just ask for help. What they'll do is they'll share all of their case information with us, reports, photos, videos, evidence, anything they have. They'll send it to the members of the team and give them all time to review that information. And then they'll come to a meeting and they will present their case to the team. And then we'll roundtable it, and all of the different perspectives and disciplines in the room will provide input. Maybe bring up things that haven't been thought of before, provide resources, whatever it is we can do to try and help that local agency progress that case moving forward, but without us taking a lead. And again, that's totally up to them whether they request that of us or not. The other way is that they simply want us to take the investigation over, and the same process is followed. And if we agree to take that investigation over, then at that time, it's assigned out to one of the 7 agents on the team. How the work gets done. The agents and the analyst and the intel analyst, this is all a voluntary and a second duty for every one of these employees. They all maintain a full caseload. They're all expected to handle their normal job duties before they handle their cold cases. So they work on these cases when they have time. And, generally we have meetings every 30 to 45 days, a cold case meeting every 30 to 45 days. There's times when nothing gets done in that 30 to 45 days on these cases because the agents assigned simply have other things going on and don't have the time. There's other times where there's a lot of movement on these cases. So as a result of that, these cases take a long time. They take a long time for us to work them. There's just really no other way for us at the moment to go about putting more time into these than what we do right now. One of the things that we try really hard to do is to continue to include the local agency in the follow-up that we're doing. Sometimes they're very receptive to that. Sometimes they don't, they simply don't have the time either to be involved. But we really do try and keep those relationships with the local agencies and keep them involved as much as they would like to be or as much as they can be. So they, it's just another body and another resource for us to help move the case forward. That's kind of an overview generally of our cold case team, how it started and how we operate it today. Before I pass this off to Commander Waldock, is there any questions of me?
Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Landon, members of the committee. I'm going to go over a little bit with some statistics. Since the inception in 2012 of our cold case team, our DCI cold case team has participated in, had some role assisting, or we took the case of 39 cold cases, and those include unsolved homicides, missing person cases, as well as sexual assaults. We've had some very good success in doing these cases, have had our successes highlighted on multiple, TV programs, books. But when we started the case and started the cold case team in 2012, we reached out to, it was new to us forming a team doing this. And so we reached out to some partnering states or some bordering states, specifically South Dakota and Colorado, because their agency is similar to ours. We also looked at national best practices of cold case teams and how they work. What we discovered, South Dakota had 2 full-time agents involved in doing nothing but cold case homicides. Colorado has 1 full-time dedicated agent. They kind of have a multi-prong approach, which was very well done by the LSO, which is in the documents that you have. I thought I'd provide a couple case examples of some cases that we've had very good success on. One of the most recent cases was right here in Sheridan County, all the way back in 1992 in April and May of 1990, or excuse me, March and April of 1992. 2 unidentified females were found murdered in 2 different jurisdictions within Wyoming. The one here in Sheridan was found off of I-90. Again, she was unidentified. So we provided her a moniker, for the lack of a better term, of I-90 Jane Doe. Another one was found a month later off the Bitter Creek Exeter pullout off of I-80. in rural Sweetwater County. Again, unidentified female had been murdered. We provided her with the moniker of Bitter Creek Betty. The local jurisdictions worked those cases really hard, trying to find out A, who they were, and B, who the offender was. Ultimately, the cases went cold, and in 1996, we were asked to take those cases over after our Wyoming State Crime Laboratory matched those cases together through DNA of the offender. So through a collaborative investigation in that case with the FBI, again, our local partners with the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office and the Sheridan County Sheriff's Office, as well as agencies in Tennessee and Ohio, were able to arrest the suspect in that case for multiple homicides, including I-90 Jane Doe, Bitter Creek Betty, and another victim in Tennessee. The case is currently being prosecuted in Tennessee, and at the conclusion of that trial, the offender will be brought here to Wyoming to face charges in Sweetwater County and Sheridan. Our agents, our local partners, our scientists, all used current technologies, best science, and always look for new approaches in solving these cases. So that's one case that I'll highlight. I can't go into a lot of detail on that case because it is still an active case being prosecuted. The next case, some of you may have seen or heard of this case, but it was a Gerald and Alice Uden case. This case, if you haven't read the book, it's a book by Ron Francel, Allison, and Gerald Uden. I think it's a homicidal love story, I think is what it's called. This case started all the way back in 1975 with the death of a gentleman by the name of Ron Holtz. At the time, Ron Holtz was the husband of Alice Uden, and the death of Mr. Holtz was never reported, but investigative efforts by us, by the FBI, again, local agencies, including the fire department at one point, were ultimately able in 2013 to recover and discover Mr. Holtz's body in rural Laramie County out on the Remont Ranch. In 1980, let's back up a little bit. 1980, Virginia, Richard, and Reagan Uden all disappeared from Fremont County, and their bodies to date have never been recovered. Again, a collaborative investigation with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit, and many local agencies over the years. In 2013, Alice and Gerald Uden were arrested in Missouri, in rural Missouri, for 4 counts of homicide for Mr. Holtz, Virginia, Richard, and Reagan Uden. I guess it would be Gerald and Alice Uden ultimately were found guilty or pled guilty to these 4 homicides here in Wyoming. Again, our agents, over the years from 1975, 1980 forward, continually looked at new approaches and different technologies that we can use to further these cases. Overall, since the inception of our team in 2012, we've been responsible for solving 9 homicides and 2 sexual assault cases. One of those was a serial rapist up in the Jackson Hole area. Generally, our approach to these cases are kind of a multidisciplinary approach, where we utilize our intel section or our fusion center, our operations section, which is our agents, law enforcement, as well as our crime laboratory. An example of what they do and how they do it. Our intel section is responsible for intel gathering, pattern of life, victim analysis, suspect data mining, criminal records, social media analysis in today's world. Operations, which is again our agents. We review the case. We review the evidence. We re-interview witnesses, whether a lot of those people don't live here. So it incurs a lot of travel and digging to find where they're at. We also re-interview witnesses that might still have information that maybe wasn't uncovered back when the original investigation took place. And we develop and follow up leads that come from those interviews. Our crime lab obviously is the analysis of new and old evidence that we might find. They also provide subject matter experts in DNA, blood spatter, fingerprints, as well as courtroom testimony for those things. We have DCI in general has many tools afforded to them by the taxpayers here in Wyoming to further our cold cases, including our Wyoming State Laboratory, which in my opinion is top notch. They currently look for best practices, new ways to do DNA, new ways to process evidence to continue these cases. We also, as Team Leader McDonald talked about this morning, have computer forensics capabilities, which maybe wasn't available when these cases started, whether it be 5 years ago or 10 years ago, as well as cell phone forensics, which is a huge thing in today's world. I don't think anybody in here probably doesn't have a cell phone, and it's amazing what those devices collect over, especially over the years. One thing also we're trying to get trained up on and working hard towards is genetic genealogy. It's in kind of an emerging trend in solving cold cases and also identifying unidentified victims of crime. It's extremely time consuming and it takes some specialized training to get that done. So I think some of the components, at least to our success in recent years with these homicide cases and sexual assault cases, is our administration from the beginning has allocated resources to solving these cases, whether that's personnel, lab cost, travel cost, or overtime, and acknowledge that these cases are a priority. Again, going back to what Director Jones says, these are an ancillary duty that our agents take on. So they're an extra duty that they do. So they can't provide full-time investigation on these cases. We've been to a lot of training in regards to cold cases, running cold cases, teams, that type of thing. We also have really good working relationships with our local and federal partners, which we've talked about a little bit here today. The FBI has been a huge help with us, specifically the behavior analysis unit and their ability to be on our team and utilize those researches or those resources. We also continually try to stay up on new and emerging technology in cold cases and try to be at the cusp of that at any time that we can. That's really what I have to say about cold cases. I have some stuff in regards to unsolved homicides, unless you want me to continue, or do you want me to stop here and ask for questions, Chairman?
Let's jump in with Mr. Co-Chairman.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Is there any ability to look at the large number of missing persons and calculate how many of those might be murder victims as opposed to just missing? Is there an algorithm or a best practice for trying to get a handle? Because it seems to me we have a whole lot more missing persons than we do murders or solved murders or unsolved murders. But how many of those might actually be unsolved murders?
Chairman Washit, I wish I had an easy answer to that question. I don't think there's an algorithm to tell you if a missing person is considered that is missing maybe due to suspicious circumstances, if you will. I think it depends on the case. If we don't get involved in those cases, I can't tell you that I can give you a number for that. I would agree with you in the fact that there is a lot of missing persons cases within Wyoming that absolutely look suspicious or could be suspicious. But as Director Jones talked about, we don't get involved in every one of these cases. So it'd be hard for me to put a number on that.
Further questions, Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On going with that particular statement, is there a mechanism, because you guys are statutorily mandated to help when asked, but outside of that, this wouldn't fall into your statutory mandates. So do you have the capability of saying, no, we're not going to investigate as to, something way back here or something? Do you have what is your criteria for being able to say, we're not going to find out who exactly killed General Custer?
Mr. Waldock, go ahead.
Chairman Landon, Senator Jennings, to my knowledge, at least since 2012 and this inception of this team, we haven't turned down any cold cases to my knowledge. The 39 cases are what we've been approached to. National best practice on cold cases specifically is no more than 5 per person, and that's somebody working in full time. So, I can't say as if we had an influx of them, we wouldn't have to say no just because we don't have the manpower to do so. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Other than the 39 cases that have been assigned to your unit, does anyone in Wyoming track how many unsolved homicides there might be? I did some looking at old news stories, and back in the 1970s, there was a grant acquired for DCI to implement a better reporting system, because back in the day, sheriffs, when they left office, took their files with them, and other cases where we just had zero documentation. Do we have any agency responsible for whether they are in the lead or not? But does anybody keep track of how many unsolved homicides there are in Wyoming, and what's our best estimate of how many there might be?
Chairman Washit, we do not have a tracking mechanism for how many cold case homicides or missing persons believed to be missing in, suspicious circumstances. We do not have that. Our state website, the Wyoming DCI website, does highlight about 15 cases that are on there that are cold case homicides. However, I've been in law enforcement for 29 years, and the majority of my time in law enforcement has been in the Natrona County area. And I was a detective there before I came to the state, and I could name off the top of my head probably 5 or 6 homicides that it was either in my time in patrol or detectives that are cold cases that we certainly don't have any purview to at this time.
Did that mean, Mr. Waldock, that you have not been asked to become involved in those? Is that what you meant?
Chairman Landon, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question that when you mentioned about you have to be asked to be involved in a case, I started thinking about how long do some of these counties and cities work on a case until they figure out, hey, we're just not getting anywhere before they involve you guys? Because I would think that would make a big difference on your success rate. Does it go a year or 2 years? Is it a case by case thing? What would you say about that?
Sure.
Mr. Waldock, yeah.
Chairman Landon, Senator Schuler. It really does vary. I was involved in a cold case homicide that happened in 1990 in Casper, Wyoming, and I didn't get involved in that case. My agency didn't get involved in that case until 2005. Obviously, the one I highlighted, I-90 Jane Doe and Bitter Creek Betty, we were involved in that within 4 years. But we have some very good investigators within our agency. And like I say, we never have said no yet to cold case requests.
Thank you for that. Further questions, committee? We just offline, we're just talking about why cases would be allowed to languish like that, and whether or not those local entities are really working those cases and not reaching out to you for some of the tools that you can bring to the effort. So anyway, just curious about that. Having worked both sides of the fence, any thoughts about that, Mr. Waldock? Not to out the guys in my hometown, but that's where you worked. I'm just curious why we would have cases dating back many, many years. Are they really working those?
Senator Landon, I couldn't speak for the local agencies and I wouldn't speak for them. You know, some of the agencies, and I was going to talk a little bit about this as we move forward. Unfortunately, very few agencies in the state have the budget or the manpower to have somebody specifically assigned to homicide or cold case investigations solely. The detectives I'll use, for instance, in Casper Police Department, they have multiple duties, kind of like we do. They have persons detectives, which would be homicide detectives, but they also do other persons crimes, right? It may be an ownership thing. You know, they bought it, they're going to clean it type thing, and they're going to do their best to solve it. Other than that, I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, it was a tough question. Thank you for your comments. Anything, committee, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Commander Waldock, someone told me that the number of officer involved law enforcement shootings in the last recent past has gone up significantly, and that drains resources from DCI for not just cold cases, but everything else. Kind of as a sidelight, can you talk a little bit about the impact of those types of investigations on your other work?
Sure. Chairman Washit, earlier, I guess it'd be last year. It would be February or March of last year. We seen a need similar to kind of the cold case team to have a specialized unit involved in officer involved shooting. We've seen a huge uptick in those over the recent years. And last year, specifically in 2022, was what I would call an epic year for officer involved shootings. We averaged 5 to 7 officer involved shootings over a 10-year period. Last year we had 15. The officer involved shootings are extremely time consuming, not only for us, but the crime lab, and very draining on local resources as well. Typically on those cases, we have probably at least 30 to 60 and sometimes even 90 days to get those from start to finish. And that's working at almost full time to get that case to our prosecutors, to have them make a decision on whether or not that case gets charged or not. So duties like that absolutely take away the time and resources that we can dedicate to cold case homicide investigations, cold case sexual assault investigations, and missing persons as well.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commander, just to follow up, so we have this handout about alternative approaches that other states, different routes that they've taken. And I'm just curious if you have an opinion about that and whether or not there is a need to, based on what you just said,
Sure.
To implement another route.
Chairman Landon, Representative Rodriguez Williams. I have reviewed that. There's many different ways. We don't have the ability to assign somebody full-time to do these duties. So we kind of decided on more of a hybrid approach where we just had a lot of really good investigators get together and, you know, using best practice standards across the United States and put together really good cases moving forward. You know, Colorado only has one full-time agent assigned to it, but they have a kind of a multi-prong approach, right? They have a cold case review team. They have a cold case homicide team. And then they have also, I'd have to refer back to my notes, but they also have another team that looks into those as well. I believe has 16 retired investigators that look into those. And so there's many different options. I think we've done really well with what we have, and what we've been able to accomplish, I think, is really good. But as far as other avenues and other things we've looked at, we've pretty much stuck in our wheelhouse where we felt comfortable where we were at.
Hey, Mr. Co-Chairman. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question. So some of these states do produce task force reports on these cold cases, and they specifically report them to the legislature through various briefings and so forth. Does your team have any interest in doing that, or is there reports available, et cetera?
Chairman Landon, Representative Rodriguez Williams. We absolutely could provide something to the legislature in form of a document, of course, with the approval of our director. But as far as the different approaches, I know some states, the legislatures have provided a tax credit in one state. One state pays retired investigators with certain criteria, like 10 years investigative experience, that type of thing, $24 and some change an hour to come in and help investigate those cases as a more of a review team and investigative team. So obviously that's not in my purview to make a decision on that. But there's certainly other options, absolutely, that were highlighted very well in the document provided by LSO.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are any statutory changes needed in order for you to utilize, you said you had a retired FBI agent, but to use retired state and local homicide investigators, other than money for a stipend or pay or something, is there any statutory changes in terms of their peace officer credentials that would be needed for them to work on a review team as you described it?
Chairman Washit, one avenue available to us, and it is, I believe, at the direction of our director, is we could provide, I guess, more of a reserve status as an agent through post, through peace officer standards and training, provided that they haven't been out of law enforcement for too long. So whether or not that would take, if you have somebody who's been retired 10 years, maybe they wouldn't be able to be a reserve agent by statute. I don't know what the rules are there, but we have had some reserve agents throughout the past that we could, that could be an avenue we could do. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I've got kind of an odd question. So what if local law enforcement isn't inclined to support you looking at a cold case from their jurisdiction? And I don't know if that's at the sheriff level in a county or if it's at a municipal level, if the municipality, it's many, many years ago investigated something and, is there a way to get past that? To have you look at, I don't know how to say this, but for whatever reason, maybe local law enforcement doesn't want you to look at it, or I'm not sure why they would say that. I doubt if that ever happens, but is there a way to get around that opposition?
Chairman Landon, Senator Case, I believe our director talked about our ability to get involved in cases and what we have original jurisdiction in. Cases like this, traditionally, we have had been requested to do so. I'm unaware of an avenue where we can just go in and swoop in and take a case, but again, that might be out of my purview.
And Mr. Chairman, can I just follow up?
Go ahead, Senator.
So supposing there were cases out there that were like that, who would have avenues? I mean, citizens, or how would you move that along if you thought that was worth looking into? Maybe because at the time there were rumors about things being bungled up and DNA was different back then and all these sort of things. I'm just curious how you can get around that if it was in the public's interest to go farther. And I can see Representative Chairman Washington.
So let's go to Mr. Co-Chairman and give you a break, Commander. How about that? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It used to be, at least, that the governor, the prosecutor could also request DCI take over a case. So it didn't always have to be the chief executive of the law enforcement agency that made that request. I don't know if that's still the way it is or not. Maybe the director could answer.
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is still the case in Wyoming. We can become involved in an investigation outside of our original jurisdiction at the request of a police chief, a sheriff, or at the request of a county or district attorney, or we can be directed to conduct an investigation by the attorney general or the governor.
So go ahead, Representative. Yeah, I was just going to say, I was involved in a group that ended up calling our local law enforcement folks on a cold case. And it kind of sounds like, to answer Senator Case's question, it kind of sounds like really the only avenue is for our constituents to get their heads together and put pressure on a local agency to allow you guys to utilize your expertise and join in the effort. That's what happened in Casper. I'm looking at the commander, and he remembers what we think was an abduction of a pretty prominent lady on the east side of Casper. We've never heard another word. It took a long time before the state was allowed to come in and get a look at it. And going back to Senator Schuler's concern, the longer you wait before you involve state resources, the more difficult it is for your guys. But anyway, go ahead, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the same vein of what we've been talking about, so like the word opposition was just used. How prevalent, I guess, and it's kind of a difficult question, but I'm assuming some of them are because they don't think there's any leads, things like that. And I know you don't want to speak ill, if you will, or get involved in that, but is it opposition, actual opposition that you feel like you find in relation to bringing on your resources, or because there are some out there and maybe they don't think there's anything more that needs done in their analysis, I don't know, that they're not bringing to you? What are your thoughts on that, as far as, I don't know, a percentage, or your thought about actual opposition to, the territorial idea versus just that it's not a case they want to bring to you?
So if that one was for you, Director, we warmed that potato up in the microwave for you. So here you yeah.
Chairman Landon, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Oakley. In my time at DCI, I have not, there have been times where we have felt some opposition in certain types of cases. But overall, the relationships we have with the local agencies around the state is excellent. And what the reason is on some cases to why they don't call right away, your guess is as good as mine. There's no doubt that there's some territorial stuff that goes on. But I've never felt like any agency was opposed to calling us for help. Some agencies feel like they have the resources and the expertise to handle it on their own, and they try. And some agencies recognize quickly that they don't. And generally those are the smaller agencies. The smaller agencies in the state tend to be very quick to call for help. The larger agencies who have more resources, more people with, expertise equal to ours, and maybe even the resources equal to ours. I think they tend to look at it like, this is our case, and we're going to work on it, and we're going to solve it. I don't know what the answer is as to why everybody doesn't call right away. But I certainly have never felt that any agency has been necessarily opposed to calling DCI when they need help, or at least when they recognize that they need, or they could use some help.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow up?
For a new director, I thought he did really well.
I think he's doing great, Mr. Chairman.
Case.
So I don't think there's anything really nefarious, I just think people are looking at their resources and they're deciding if it's worth putting emphasis into something and something that's really, really way old and, you know, nothing ever came out of it at the time, but the piece I'm bringing up is that, isn't that why we want to do this, is get a fresh set of eyes on whatever was there. We have new scientific analysis that might be available. You have this wonderful lab, the DNA is so different than it was back then, that maybe just, instead of just doing a full-blown investigation, if you could just touch on what happened and what the history is, and then ascertain whether it's worth going forward. Just put it on the table for a discussion one day and see, hey, is this really worth putting anything more into? And maybe that's collaborative with the local law enforcement. I mean, I'm thinking of some pretty old cases in my neck of the woods, but isn't that where you say, well, what did the evidence contain? And then, gee, we have new techniques to look at that now. And I don't even know what I'm talking about here, but it just seems like that's why you want fresh eyes on this kind of stuff.
Thank you, Senator Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to decide if I should put this in the form of a question. It isn't something that you publicize if you are involved in a case necessarily. Would that be accurate?
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Director. You bet.
Representative Oakley, yes, that's accurate.
And so to maybe just discuss cases that have been that the public may not know, but DCI is involved in quite a few cases that, again, like a missing, something that might be called a missing person case there, and that's involved in this, right? The missing person along with the homicide, you said. So just so you know, they're working on many cases that the public may not be aware of.
I got a wink out of my prosecutor's office. That doesn't really tell me about some of these cases I'm thinking about that I really want to know. Why can't we take a look at that? And they weren't missing. One of them's a murder case.
You know, Director, what I'm sensing from fellow committee members is just a little better, more definitive sense of what cases might be out there. You know, I think part of our effort on this front is just to learn all we can about things that our constituents ask us about. You know, the case that I alluded to a little bit earlier, that remains a hole in the heart of the entire east side of Casper and beyond. You know, something that family, boy, I'd give anything if we could find something out there. I think that's why the interest exists, but we do have to keep moving along though, Director, and so because we have people ready to testify online, I want to allow you three to proceed and finish up on this topic. Any thoughts you have, and we can continue the discussion after we get other testimony. Go ahead, Director.
Chairman Landon, I guess what I would wrap up this conversation by saying is that DCI, we are a customer service agency. If a local law enforcement agency needs help, we go. We don't ask questions. We don't say no, we go. But we do have to walk a fine line when it comes to cases like Senator Case is referring to, because the last thing that we exist because of the relationships we have with local law enforcement and our federal partners. And the last thing that we want to do is step on anyone's toes and damage the relationships that we rely on to remain relevant. So I guess that's what I would end on saying. Commander, do you have any further?
Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. The day's getting a little bit longer, so there's a little bit of urgency just to get to some others who are online ready to testify. If we have further questions, hopefully we can have you here for a few minutes longer. Let's go to, we have folks online. Is that public testimony or who do we have online, Emily? Mr. Hargrove and Mr. Szynski. Can we allow maybe both of those gentlemen in, and we'll start with Mr. Hargrove?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we certainly can. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Thomas Hargrove. I am the founder and chairman of a small nonprofit organization called the Murder Accountability Project. We seek to study homicide by building what is, without debate, the most complete accounting of homicide available anywhere. We take FBI data and then augment it with data from agencies that do not voluntarily participate in reporting crime information to the federal government. We do so under Freedom of Information Act laws. So I guess I have good news and bad news to report about Wyoming. The good news approaches being great. From our standpoint, the bad news is why we exist. Looking at the last 55 years of crime reporting, since 1965, Wyoming authorities have reported a total of 1,006 homicides to the FBI. Your agencies reported clearing through arrest 856 homicides, which gives you a clearance rate of 85%. That's the best in the nation. In second place would be North Dakota with an 83% clearance rate, followed by Nebraska with less than an 82% rate. So that's the good news. Looking at the data, Wyoming is a standout in other ways. 90% of your homicide victims are Caucasian, which is the whitest murder panel I've ever seen. 5% are Native Americans, 3% are African Americans, and 2% are Asian. 33% of your murder victims are women, which is a much higher rate than average in America. 22% is the national average. And you have an older homicide population. Your mode age for a murder victim, the most common age is 26, compared to a national mode of something like 21 or 22. So it's an older, much wider, slightly more female victim. The bad news about Wyoming is we're not sure we're seeing the whole picture. The Centers for Disease Control report that from 2010 to 2019, based on a study we've just done, there were 193 murders in Wyoming. The last decade, the FBI received reports of only 147 murders. That means that nearly 24% of your murders appear to be missing, as reported to the FBI. That's a missing murder rate only surpassed by Mississippi, where most murders go unreported, Alabama, and West Virginia. We don't know much about these missing murders because we don't know what we don't know. We suspect at least some of them are Native Americans in the jurisdiction of the FBI that were not reported to the FBI. We actually have a lawsuit pending against the federal government. All of the federal law enforcement agencies that might handle homicides. And we have pending litigation against the Bureau itself and against the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the National Park Service. These are all agencies that very well may be dealing with Indian murders in Wyoming. We don't know what we don't know. We are hoping to open the gate and get some of those murders from the federal government. Overall, we don't see much that's broken in Wyoming based on your clearance rate. assuming that the data that you have reported is accurate, you're looking at something like 150 unsolved murders committed since 1965. Again, you have the highest clearance rate in America. Congratulations. We think there are probably two factors involved in that. One is that you're very rural. And rural places enjoy, by definition, community policing because everybody knows everybody. In addition, we suspect that CDI has a part to play, that it is our experience that an effective working relationship between local police and state police can have a positive impact. Texas has a much higher clearance rate than does California. We think part of that is the work of the Texas Rangers, who have a very good working relationship with local police. It sounds like you have a very good working relationship between CDI and local police. We commend you for that. I am happy to take any questions.
Mr. Hargrove, thank you. Really appreciate some great information. Thank you very much for hanging in there and your patience this afternoon. Question by Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. With your sort of maybe national experience, do you see in other places where there's difficulty maybe getting information from federal agencies? You mentioned Wyoming and in our federal jurisdiction. So I'm interested if you've seen any sort of, again, parallel difficulties, if you will, with transparency, sharing of information through the federal government.
Well, I'm afraid transparency in federal crime reporting is perfect. The FBI has not reported a single crime from 1965 through 2019. After we filed 2 lawsuits, the FBI began reporting. They reported investigating 3 murders in 2020. We informed the court that 3 is a ridiculous number. The next year, they reported 33 homicides, which is in the ballpark, we think. But to answer your question, the lack of transparency with federal crime reporting is perfect. The federal government has just not been following the law. Congress, by the way, passed a law in 1988 requiring federal law enforcement to report data to the Uniform Crime Report, including the FBI, including the Department of Defense. That law was perfectly ignored. It's the source of our litigation. We're trying to recover almost 33 years worth of unreported murders. And so far, we are making some progress. We are having discussions with the Department of Defense, and we've had limited discussions with the FBI. We hope that we will be providing more data in the near future. Again, we don't know exactly where those 46 unreported murders in Wyoming happened last decade. We would guess that some of them were in federal jurisdiction.
For the question, Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, sir. This is much appreciated. Representative Oakley and I come from the area of the Wind River Reservation, and it's oftentimes where there's a reported death, but you don't know who the death is for months. I mean, that is not an unusual thing. It's a very strange thing, and I always thought that the purpose of like having inquests and bringing information is to protect the public, and I feel like that's a problem. And I wonder about the role of local coroners and things in this, who can be involved but aren't always. And it's just I'd sure like to learn more about this and to have you talking about our federal friends not following the law about disclosure or transparency, I think that's really significant. It is in my neck of the woods.
Mr. Hargrove, that the challenge I think that the senator is alluding to is these different we've got a sovereign nation, and so we have a separation there of powers, et cetera. Do you see that all across the country with reservation properties, for example? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, in fact, the Interior Department has done good work trying to convince Native American nations to improve their crime reporting. The Navajo Nation, which is the largest reservation in the country, has really stepped up and improved their transparency. They're a pretty good police organization, as far as we can tell. They certainly have opened the floodgates to reporting data to the federal government. They are a sovereign nation who operates their own police department, conducts their own murder investigations. That is not the case in most reservations, where tribal authorities will negotiate either with the federal government or with state or local authority to partner with investigating serious crimes. Yeah, it's a problem in Wyoming. It's a problem in most states where there are significant Native American populations.
Any follow-ups, committee? Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Hargrove, I just have one quick question. So you mentioned that we're number one in that, and that we still have possibly 46. But any correlation to the fact that being very rural and a fairly gun-loving state, maybe we have a few more people that are not victims? Do you have any? I'm sorry. Any evidence of that? The more gun-loving states that don't have quite as many victims, maybe?
Boy, the Murder Accountability Project takes no position on firearm policy. In fact, we found that that debate often sucks all the oxygen out of a room. I will say that the data are all across the board about guns and murder. The state of Wyoming during the last decade had 3.3 homicides per 100,000 population. Congratulations, that's among the lowest in the nation. But there are other Western states that lead the nation in homicides. And I would imagine their position on guns are quite similar as with many Wyomingans. I personally have nothing to say about gun policy. I only take a position on the right to count bodies, and to count murders, we are prepared to go to the wall on. We won't make any position on guns.
Go ahead, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, and let's just kind of be the 86 or 83% clearance rate. That's
85%.
That's in the 85%. Thank you, sir. I'm sorry. That would be independent of the murder rate itself. It just says of the murders committed, this is the number that are cleared. It's a very high number. It's a commendable number. Even with 40, I guess the 46 that happened possibly on the reservation, they may or may not be cleared or not. We don't know. We don't know how that would change, but that's a really good number. Doesn't really have anything to do with the rate in Wyoming or this other circumstances. It's good information.
Any other thoughts or questions for Mr. Hargrove? Representative Neiman, you go ahead.
Mr. Hargrove, during the UCR reporting for local agencies, is that mandated or is that a voluntary program?
It in most states is a voluntary program. When Congress created the Uniform Crime Report in 1930, it was conceived as an entirely voluntary program. Some states have mandated it, but generally speaking, police may or may not report. The only carrot that the federal government offers is that to provide at least what we call a body count, the SRS, the summary reporting system, to at least count the number of occurrences of major crimes is necessary to qualify for assistance to law enforcement grants. And that is actually a pretty good carrot to offer. That is why gradually over the decades, the reporting rate by police has improved. All of that went by the wayside last year when the FBI adopted NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, as a mandatory, much more complete crime reporting system. Half of the country went dark when that happened. Wyoming did a better than average job there, and we commend you for adopting to the NIBRS standard. Most of your police agencies were able to report to the FBI in 2021. So we give you gold stars for that.
Thank you. Anything else, committee? Oh, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another topic that we're talking about today is medical examiners. So state of Wyoming, to my understanding right now, is that we don't have forensic pathologists of our own. We send most of our homicide cases and other death investigations out of state. I'm wondering if you have any information as to impact of that at all. I know it might be a reach for you, but for states that have more access or readily available access to, say, a medical forensic pathologist, someone who can investigate the body as evidence, does that have any impact on the efficacy or how effective the investigations are?
Mr. Hargrove, go ahead. We don't have much on medical examiners because we primarily are worried about getting the police to report data. I will say that we regard the homicide count provided by the CDC to be a superior bit of data over what police report. That historically, CDC reports a much larger number of homicides. That is information taken directly from the death certificates. Death certificates are mandated in America. Unlike crime reporting by police, you cannot lawfully dispose of remains without having a death certificate. And many Americans have been prosecuted for disposing of remains without following the rules. I cannot speak to having to rely on medical examiners out of state. That doesn't sound like a good thing. It might solve a bit of a mystery. In 2021, the CDC reported 15 homicides while police in Wyoming reported 17. We don't know why that is. We generally think that you're in the ballpark, though. Frankly, there are many states where it's a nightmare to estimate what the true number of homicides are. We think we have a pretty good guess what's happening in Wyoming, and you're killing each other at a much lower rate than the national average.
Thank you, Mr. Hargrove. Appreciate that. Anything else, committee follow up? Anything to follow up on? Mr. Hargrove, it's really been appreciated. I have enjoyed the conversation, learned a lot. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I indicated to you earlier, I suspect you have more to teach me than I have to teach you. It does seem like the model in Wyoming is ahead of the curve. So thank you.
We will share that. Thank you very much, Mr. Hargrove. We do have someone else waiting, at least one, Mr. Suzuki, is that right? Szynski, my apologies, Mr. Szynski. If you could allow him to come on board. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove.
Can you hear me?
Mr. Kozinski, thank you very much for your patience.
That's okay.
Take it away. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. I'll just do a little preamble. I started my law enforcement career in Calumet City, Illinois in 1980, and then I moved to Casper, Wyoming in 1982 for a very short time. It was a tad cold there. Then I moved to Seattle. I moved to Seattle and I worked homicide cold cases for 22 years before retiring and starting my writing career. I now write books about serial murder cases that I've investigated. DNA has opened the door for detectives everywhere to take a closer look at these cases. But DNA is only one of the tools that will likely help you in these types of cases, especially decades-old cases. Probably the most important piece in solving these cases is the suspect interview. I was fortunate to have arrested and convicted 7 serial murderers. One aspect stood out in all these cases. All these murderers were sociopaths. So the suspects raped and had sex with these victims. It was not about the sex in any of these types of cases. It was about the murders. Having trained cold case homicide detectives investigating these cases is a very crucial aspect to any time you work in the homicide in larger cities. Now, let me go back to saying, working at homicides in Seattle compared to other cities, compared to like in my hometown in Chicago, where they average right now about 810 homicides a year. And then when you go to the south suburbs of Chicago, where I was raised also, in Calumet City, Harvey, and those type of places like there, that's where crime is really bad. Now, in Seattle, we only average about 45 homicides a year. I say only, but comparatively, all the other larger cities our size usually will average about 300 homicides a year. So it's kind of refreshing when I'm hearing the stats coming out of Wyoming. That is great. An 87% clearance rate, that's fabulous. And it's just not luck. I mean, some people are doing some really, really good work. The city of Casper and all the other counties around there, you guys have to be doing great work. One of the things I wanted to bring up is investigating rape cases. Doing thorough investigations of rape cases and keeping the evidence around for at least 20 years is crucial. That will lead to catching serial murderers. That was kind of like when I went to cold cases, I kind of fell into it. That was kind of like my partner and I, our specialties working on serial murder cases. And at that time, I've been retired for 4 years. It opened up doors to everyone else in larger cities, having full-time cold case detectives, not part-time detectives. Like I heard Art was telling me, Casper and Trona County and some of the other places, you have part-time detectives. That's a real tough call. You need full-time detectives, and there's plenty of work for them. There will be plenty of work for them. It's kind of hard. Make them a cold case detective and a sexual crimes detective, but having part-time detectives is really, really difficult. And I would go to seminars throughout the country and talk to people, and we all agreed it was really tough having part-time detectives because they don't stick around that long. You know, they're retired for a reason. You know, they did their time. Now they're going to look at these cases, and they don't really have the expertise in them, reviewing cases. And then it's not just about the reviewing cases; it's about going and talking to the people, to number one, the suspect, obviously, and also some of the victims' relatives and other witnesses, and some other guys that were, you know, a little shady. Sometimes you need the badge to do that type of stuff. I was lucky enough being a cold case detective and becoming very successful at that. or my squad was, my partner and I were until he retired. And then like everywhere else that happened in this country, we started downsizing. So I went from 2 homicide cold case detectives. That's all we worked on. We had sergeants try to bring me cases all the time. We want you to look at this case or do that case. Can you help us with that? We'd have to say, no, all we work is cold cases. That's all we work on. Left some hard feelings, but you know, you got to do what you got to do sometimes. So with that being said, one of the things that people have to understand, administrations, people, the board here, is travel is a big, huge part in being a cold case detective. You have to travel a lot, and which I did. I traveled just from working in Seattle cases, but I traveled across the country for interviewing suspects and arresting suspects and going to prisons. Prisons are where you're going to find most of your serial murderers. They're in there for 30 years, 35 years. I arrested guys from 1968. 72, 74, 69. And they'd always start out with the deal. Well, how am I supposed to remember that? It happened 35 years ago. Well, they're sociopaths. That's all they think about. That's all they want to do is commit murders and think about the murders. And so once we get past that little hurdle about them, when I would say to them, well, I guess you do know about this case now, don't you? And then they finally admit it because they didn't want to be taken out of their comfy prison and be put into a county jail for a couple of years, which I threatened to do to them. And they said, okay, this is what happened. And they would tell me the colors of the drapes on the walls, where they got the ligature to tie the victim up, where they got the weapon, kitchen cabinet and stuff. And I'd have to be looking through these pictures and saying, boom, 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 boom. They were exactly right, because that's all they ever do. So my point that I'm trying to make here is that having full-time dedicated detectives and cold case detectives is very imperative. Even though I know we have restraints, with budgets, but you really should try to do that. That's my spiel.
Thank you. Appreciate that testimony, and enjoyed our days together at Casper PD many years ago. You went on to bigger and better things. Do you have any questions for Mr. Szynski? Doesn't look like any questions. Thank you again for joining us. And so I'm taking, keep good track of our rape cases, maintain that evidence for long periods of time, training for our cold case investigators with regards to interview and interrogation skills, and make sure we have an adequate budget for travel, as well as funding for full-time cold case investigators. Is that a good summary of what you had to tell us?
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to say is something that about evidence. We were some of the smaller agencies in our state here. We had people come up. They said we had this property, this evidence in this case for 15 years, and so we just had somebody sign off on it and destroyed it. Now, most of my cases that I did were, the oldest one was like 35 years old. And we in Seattle, we passed a rule: no evidence of any murder case will be destroyed. None. 0, zip. And it made a little bit, it made things a little bit tight in the evidence unit, but paid off dividends. And so now almost every state, every jurisdiction in Washington does not destroy any evidence from a homicide.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Do you have anyone else online? No. One in the back.
Okay, we got somebody in the room, Mr. Chairman.
My mic keeps going off. Witness in the room coming forward.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Appreciate you being here. Please state your name. We've got folks streaming in and folks in the room who may not have met you yet.
Okay, my name is Kim Love. I'm here today as a private individual, but in my prior life before I retired, I was the general manager of the Sheridan Media radio stations here in Sheridan. I have a couple of questions. I'm not sure what the scope of what you're looking into is, but I've got a couple of potential questions for you. To what extent does malfeasance and obstruction of justice on the part of law enforcement interfere with the ability to solve murders and cold cases? Mr. Chairman, I would reference the case that you referred to in your hometown, which I believe is going on 9 years now. I think there is credible evidence that there was interference on the part of the senior management of the police department at that time that interfered with the ability to investigate that case. Secondly, to what extent does withholding information from the public about an investigation help in solving a crime? In order to justify withholding information, it has been my experience law enforcement will cite specific instances where information has been withheld and the case has been solved decades later. But the question is whether these are outliers. I'm not referring to holding back information in the immediate aftermath of the crime. I'm talking about years later when the case has clearly become cold. Again, I would reference the case that I think you have referred to in Casper. It's now, I believe, almost 9 years old now. Would the case have been helped if, when it had become cold, the information that was known was released to the public so that maybe information the public had could have been added to what was known about that case? I would suggest that having more sunshine into what is known about these cases sooner would solve more cases than keeping them in the dark for decades. I do have some letters here that I've written in the past that will go into more details that, with the chair's permission, I'd like to hand out to the committee members and answer any questions you might have.
I guess, Mr. Love, I don't have any problem if you'd like to provide those to our staff. We'll get those to each of the committee members. In the meantime, given the lateness of the evening, we'll move on to any questions they might have of you. Your questions have, I'm sure, been noted by those in the room and certainly by the committee. I'm pretty certain that none of us on the committee have an answer to your questions, but appreciate your testimony. So any questions for Mr. Love this evening? Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just,
Go ahead, Senator Case.
well, I appreciate your testimony very much. It's in the spirit of Jim Angel and a lot of other good people, but part of the fourth state that have pushed for more transparency in Wyoming all along. And I'm looking forward to seeing your letter. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Love, thank you.
And I would just add, if anyone, I've left my business card on here, so if any of you would like to get in touch with me, I'd be more than happy to visit with any of you collectively or individually.
Thank you so much for that. And if you don't mind just getting that over to our table full of professionals.
Lady with her hand
We'll
up.
get that taken care of. And in the meantime, Mr. Love, I wanted to share with you, I came up to the unkegging of the first keg of good old Sheridan beer that came about here 2 or 3 years ago, and took a hat down to a good friend of yours, Tim Ray, who now lives in Grand Junction. So anyway.
Thank you.
And
you know that Tim was in last year was inducted into the Wyoming Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
Isn't that the best of all? That's good stuff.
Tim worked for me when he was up here.
I knew he did. And so I wanted to share that with you. And he thinks that Sheridan beer hat is the deal. So, the bad part of it is I had to give up my Sheridan beer hat. Thank you, though.
Maybe they have another one around.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Anyway,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Kim, really appreciate it. Any further testimony? Emily, do we have anybody left online? Any further testimony from anybody in the room? Let's move on to the final topic of the day, statewide medical examiner. And Brian, I'm looking over at you. If you'd like to take this for us and at least enlighten as to This came up and we went ahead and shared it with management council, but there's been a little bit of work done on this by the legislature, no? And if you could kind of give us a rundown on that, I'd sure appreciate it.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll take your last question about what has kind of happened with this. And last year, the Joint Labor, Health and Social Services Interim Committee looked at the question of the possibility of a statewide medical examiner. The Department of Health, I believe, prepared a proposal that contemplated 2 positions for these examiners and considered where these 2 positions should go, how they could be best utilized. My understanding is that the Labor Committee did not act on that presentation from the Department of Health. I believe there was some involvement from the coroners who at that time had kind of provided their opinion on what was needed. In terms of the memorandum, I would turn any remarks over to Clarissa Nord, our legislative editor for the committee.
Clarissa, nice work on the report, by the way, that you provided to us. I know the committee studied that at great length before we got to our committee meeting today, but please share any thoughts with us.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Clarissa Nord with the Legislative Service Office. I'll just provide a quick overview of the memo before you today. For the committee's consideration, the first portion of the memo provides some background information about death investigations in general. And then I cover the purpose and structure of the Montana Medical Examiner's Office. So the statewide proposal that the Joint Labor Committee considered last interim. So in general, a coroner's or medical examiner's office conduct medical legal death investigations, and they do this to determine the circumstances under which an individual has died. And there are several personnel types involved in death investigations, and those can include coroners, medical examiners, or forensic pathologists. And I think one thing just to quickly note here is that death investigations are highly varied throughout the U.S., and so states can maintain either a coroner-based death investigation system, a medical examiner system, or a combination of both. And so Wyoming has a coroner-based death investigation system, and certainly folks who have expertise in that area can provide more information. And then with respect to Montana's Medical Examiner's Office, I can provide a brief overview if the committee is interested in that. But Montana, similarly, they maintain a coroner-based death investigation system. And this is where each county coroner is responsible for deaths occurring within their jurisdiction. And so they do have support available from the Montana State Medical Examiner's Office. And so this office provides resources to county coroners as well as autopsy services. And for the committee's information in 2021, the office employed 4 forensic pathologists, 2 autopsy assistants, and then 2 part-time autopsy assistants. And then in terms of county coroner responsibilities and the training that's required of them, so they are responsible for determining the manner and cause of deaths within their jurisdiction, but they do have discretion to request resources from that statewide medical examiner's office. And in terms of their training, at the time of their election or appointment, they have to complete a coroner basic course, which is offered through the Montana Department of Justice. And then they have to complete continuing education as well. And then for medical examiners within that office, they must be a physician licensed in the state, as well as board certified in forensic pathology. And I alluded to this earlier, but in terms of their responsibilities, they provide court testimony when necessary, encourage research within the field, maintain a training program as well, and then they perform autopsies as requested. And so in 2021, the office performed a total of 836 autopsies, And this number just comprises the number of cases that were referred to them. It doesn't necessarily include all the deaths that occurred within the state. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that was just a very quick overview of the memo, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have.
So Clarissa, I've got a quick question. So Montana requires this basic course for its coroners. The way it read in the material that you provided to us it made me think that they had to complete this before they could run for office or before they could actually be the coroner upon being elected to the office. Can you clarify that for me?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. County coroners have to complete that course at the time of their election or appointment. So presumably when they are acting as coroner, they have to have completed that education.
So my apologies, I have not had a chance to look this up prior to this meeting, but Wyoming does not have that requirement, do we?
Mr. Chairman, I can't speak to that directly, but I believe Wyoming does have that
We
requirement.
do have that requirement.
Mhm.
Okay, that's good to know. Clarissa, thank you for the information. Questions for our staff? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One issue that came up during elections in I think it was this past election for coroners, was we had someone in one part of the state who had been decertified for some things having to do with record keeping on some various topics. And then we had another person run for coroner in a different part of the state that was, I think they were taken out of the coroner profession in a different state. And so I'm wondering do we have any other standards besides just kind of that education that folks have to, with some of our other certifying agencies, they say if you've been decertified by another, you can't be certified with this agent or with this department. Any quality control.
Go ahead, Clarissa.
Mr. Chairman, I can't directly speak to what occurs in the state, unfortunately, but hopefully folks within in the room can speak to that.
Okay, we'll save that question. Anything else, Brian, from your corner?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, two quick things. First, in response to your question, Wyoming law currently requires a coroner within 1 year of assuming office to complete a coroner's course. And then, Mr. Chairman, the only other thing I would note is in the meeting materials is 4-03, and I'm not sure the level to which the county coroners are participating in today's discussion, at least, but there is information they provided about the autopsy facilities used by county and where and what facilities are used in their average number of autopsies per year.
Thank you for that reminder, Brian. Committee, any questions of the staff? Okay, for those from DCI who are still here, I'd sure entertain any thoughts that you might have on this front, if you have any. If not, that's okay. Committee, really, I think the reason we left this on here is just that it came to the good chairman from one of our county coroners, and it's educational, if nothing else. I think, Mr. Co-Chairman, any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my biggest question is, one, given the shortage of forensic pathologists nationwide, will we be able to attract somebody to even fill this type of position in Wyoming? And number two, do we have enough need that financially it makes sense? Because we're going to spend the money one way or the other. We're either the counties are going to be paying somebody from another state to perform these autopsies, and then that money goes into their state's economy. Or we could pay a state employee within our own state and who cashes that paycheck and buys his tennis shoes in the local economy. So I just think it's more of a budgetary question about, does the money make sense? Do we have enough work? And if I were a pathologist, the idea of, spending 300 days a year traveling around the state of Wyoming doing autopsies may not be the most appealing job assignment when I could do the same type of work someplace else and sleep in my own bed every night.
So Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We might not have people here interested testifying, so I just am going to say, I mean, that I'm pleased that this is on here. I know there's been some discussion, and it would be a huge supporter of getting something like this going from a criminal justice perspective. This would be extremely beneficial. We've talked a lot today about homicides and we've done a lot heading to having the forensic pathologist being in Colorado. Then of course it's about $10,000 to have them come testify. And that's just for, one case plus the cost. We have law enforcement going down with them. So I would think that we could find a way that this would be not only economical, but it would be good for these serious cases that are happening in our state. And then discussing traveling around. I mean, I don't know exactly what this would look like, but I mean, we're already taking bodies to Colorado. Yeah. I mean, we could certainly, be transporting the bodies within the state. But again, that would be facilities. We'd have to look at that. But if there's something we can do to move this a step forward and to give this a serious look, I think it would. I mean, off the cuff, my thought is this would be very beneficial to Wyoming. And then you're talking about a higher level of expertise, significantly higher than most of our coroners. And of course, then if you're talking homicide, then you want a forensic pathologist. And of course, then you're looking at out of state. So the expertise, the availability, the service that it would provide for Wyoming and Wyoming people, I think this could be an important move.
Representative, that helps me. So thank you for that series of thoughts. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, maybe LSO can clarify, or maybe I need to learn how to read. But I'm looking at the Wyoming autopsy facilities used on the last page of that memo. We had 472 uses of that average number per year. Does that mean, is this equivalent to the number of autopsies, or is this just we used space to be able to perform an autopsy, or I don't know. I'm trying to see exactly what that average number is that I added up, hopefully accurately.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, LSO did not prepare this document, so I'm hard pressed to answer any questions on it.
So committee, it does make sense, and we need to get to public comment here pretty quickly, and we can come back to thoughts shared. But the Montana model certainly is intriguing to me, but in the back of my mind, I keep reminding myself that the state to the north of us is what, 2.5, 3 times bigger than we are. Representative Jennings, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If LSO didn't prepare this document, who did?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings, this came from the County Coroners Association.
Representative Oakley, go ahead. And then Representative Provenza. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to point out for the committee, I see people kind of looking around. This, I believe, came in a later email from LSO. So if you don't have it printed, you've got it in your email, but it's just a one-page sheet from the Coroners Association, which I think she added up 470 average a year. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on the comment from Representative Oakley, if we were to do that, I'm curious if there's an in-state facility that would exists already, to anybody's knowledge, that we could perhaps use to house that position.
So Representative Provenza?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, so on this page, the Wyoming Coroners Association of those numbers, it's titled Wyoming Autopsy Facilities Used. So it seems to me that we have the facilities, the issue is the person. But if, we're sending folks out to be, to receive an autopsy, probably in part because that person is using their time in that facility instead of spending their time driving around. So, and a lot of these, I mean, Natrona would have one. Albany County, I believe, has accurate space for it. I believe at least most of our bigger counties would, if not all of them.
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, I think I'll tell you what, committee, we'll come back to a conversation real quickly. Let's make sure that we take care of some public comment on this issue. And then we'll come back to our staff in this regard. Is there anyone online this evening on this front, Emily?
And Mr. Chairman, maybe just before we jump into that, in
Sure.
response to Representative Provenza's question about the decertification, Wyoming law provides an avenue by which the Board of Coroner Standards can make a referral to the Peace Officers Standard Training Commission for the decertification of a coroner. And then after that occurs, the board can work with the Attorney General to seek the removal of that coroner who is not certified in accordance with state law.
Okay, thank you for that, Brian. Good evening, sir. Welcome. Please state your name for us, if you would.
Dr. Robert Byrd, DDS, coroner, Sheridan County. To his position on this, and this was not generated and supported by leadership from the Coroners Association. Okay, just to be clear, for clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's helpful.
My background, DDS, so you could call me a dentist, and that's okay. How about a forensic odontologist with 30 years of experience? Okay. This document describes a little different what the statute says what a coroner's mandate is. I didn't go into forensics to read a description what a coroner's like. I'm following the statute of 7.4. And I've been doing this for 30 years as my secondary job experience. I'm a retired fellow at the American Academy of Forensic Science. I've presented on a national scale to the Academy for abstracts, one with a little more national input on doing autopsies on individuals that are in full rigor. Okay, they got national. Okay, so I do have the experience. I can follow the statute. I have followed all the requirements, even as I got elected this year and sworn in January. I have met the requirements. That course requirement for coroners is not live anymore, just for your own information. It's online and it's not taught here in Wyoming. It's taught out of Missouri. Okay. As a deputy coroner, Natrona County, Fremont County, and Sheridan County, I've actually taken that course not once, the live one here provided by the Law Enforcement Academy, not twice, but 3 times. And as an instructor teaching odontology in the basic coroner's basic. So my position is on this. I am utilizing the Montana State Medical Examiner system for me, this county. Why? Because it works for me. And what's the reason is driving on the other side of the mountain, even on a good day, is not what I would want to do. It would take almost 8 hours to go to autopsy. I drive up to Billings, utilize the medical examiner system there in Billings, and they do top-notch professional work for me. They do not do the tox, and I haven't heard toxicology come up at all in this. So where do we send our tox? I use 3 sources for my tox. I use the state, I use Axis, and I use National Medical. And it's based on what I can get in return. I'm looking for a qualitative and a quantitative analysis in my death investigation. Now, the thing is this says that coroners really aren't supposed to do cause and manner. Statute 7.4 says that's what we do. That's our charge, to do what the manner of death is and what the cause of death is. Now, it works for me to go up to Billings, Montana, and utilize that medical examiner system. And I set that up prior to me being elected, just to make sure. If I didn't use that system, where would I go? Well, probably would have to go all the way to either South Dakota, and that's the corners on the west end or east end of the state. Some of them are utilizing South Dakota. The ones that are around Goshen County are going over to Nebraska, utilizing that medical examiner facility over there. And in Southeast, they're going to Colorado, utilizing that medical examiner. Why? Because it's working and it works easy for them. 35 miles is very easy to go to. We live in rural Wyoming. You know, I'm 5th generation out of Wyoming. So my grandparents came out here, great grandparents, when it was a territory. I don't know if that's time date myself, but yeah. Everything's by distance. Fremont County has its own forensic pathologist, and that works real well for them. You know, now, is that feasible for me to drive over the mountain, go over there? Not really. That's 2.5 hours. I got to ask my deputies to do that. So the position of the Coroners Association, and I hate, it'd be nice if leadership was speaking instead of me, but I'm a member of that, and I'm on that pathology committee. So I'll tell you what the association's position is. No, they don't want a state medical examiner system. And no, they don't want a state pathologist. They want to leave it just like it is. It's working now. For the larger counties, it's working for them. For me, it's working for me. I can call and schedule an autopsy next morning. And usually I can get it and timeline of getting reports and talks. They do not do toxicology. So we have to do our own tox and send it out. However, the service is, I call top notch. And you're right, it's a good system they have up there. And its availability. They have one pathologist in Billings, and they're going to acquire another one. But when I get my report back, I get my final report. I get 3 solid signatures on that report. 1 by the chief medical examiner, 2 by the 2 state medical examiner systems, which is solid and it will hold up in any medical legal arena. So I'll speak for myself and say it works for me. I put 30 years into doing this. And so I can make the call. I have the experience. And let me tell you who the trainees were. All those people that you have seen on television, all those people that are writing books and making more bucks than I am. Those are the people that trained me how to do this. And that's how I got elected. And I'm giving a quality product in Sheridan County to the taxpayers. And that's why I'm here today. But I say to the committee, think a little bit about before you jump off into this and see what the positions are. We got 23 counties and you don't have 23 counties supporting this. And an association is not in support of it. And so I don't want to be the messenger, but I'm just telling you from the last conversation before this document, this is the first time I kind of skimmed through it and everything. I don't think it'll be effective. If you could get everybody, 23 counties to buy into this, might work. But like you said before, Mr. Chair and senators and representatives, how do you get a pathologist to come here and perform X number of autopsies? It's being tried and it's not working. And I'll just be frank, Bighorn County is bringing in local tendems to come into Bighorn County. But how does Bighorn County, we have to supply the cases for Bighorn County. They're just not there. The numbers aren't there. So.
Well, Dr. Bird, really appreciate you being here. And thanks for a little bit of a rundown on how you got to where you are. We do appreciate it. And we're sorry that the association couldn't be here, but you being a member does help. And appreciate it. Any questions for Dr. Bird? Evening. Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
So just in a ballpark, what does it cost a county to perform an autopsy when you have to load up the body, drive it out of state, pay for the work that's done there? What is, if you had to put a price tag on it, what does that cost?
Let me break it down for
Dr.
you.
Bird,
That's a
go ahead.
great question because I'm in that bind right now. I have no vehicles and I have no facility. So I'm married to a couple of funeral homes and I have to utilize their services, their coolers. I have no coolers. By the end of September, let's just say it's on the books, we should have our own facility to handle with a capacity of 14 to 20. Okay, so the cost is $150 for a driver, $25 for a cooler per day. And there's one more fee that did I say the driver? 150. The rental of the vehicle and the storage. So it comes out, let's just say on an average about $250 per case. And if I have to go to autopsy, I have to hire a driver and a car to go up to Billings. Because I'm on salary, it doesn't cost me, the county doesn't have to pay for that.
Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
And does the doctor in Billings charge you as well? Was that?
Yes, the autopsy fee is an agreement we have is $1,800 per case. Okay. I think across the state, it's about 2,000 if it averages out, and that's without tox. If you add the tox that we send out, it's on the average of 300 per panel that we order, except one organization gives us a Wyoming group rate. And so we get a discount of about $100, and that's Axis Toxicology out of Indiana.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bird, for being here and your testimony. I'm just interested, but you said like you get top notch from Billings, and I guarantee you, they, I'm sure, don't doubt that at all. But we do have to ask them and contract with them. And something I noted, you said, where would I, if they weren't there, where would I go? And I mean, in essence, that's one of the things we're discussing, I think, right? Is that then we're not dependent on hoping that somebody out of state will contract with us, if you will. I know one of the things that happened in Colorado is the long-term medical examiner was retiring. And we did have a where would I go situation. And then you mentioned this, the man in Lander who's been absolutely incredible. And it's been a great boon for Wyoming and Fremont County, but he moved to Lander to retire. And thank goodness for his service, but I don't know. I don't even want to say it. I don't know how long he'll want to continue it, since his plan was to move to Wyoming to retire. So can you see, though, a benefit then if we could have one for including very rural places, or something where it's their state employee, so we don't have to concern ourselves about where would I go, at that point.
Representative and Mr. Chair, it's Wyoming. We're bound by distance. And where I live it's going to be, it'll be either 2-hour drive south or 4 hours over the mountain. And on a good winter day, that's not even good, to drive. You see what I'm saying? It's just, and I'll speak for myself. I would not put my staff to drive over the mountain for an autopsy. It would be 4 hours if we went all the way over to Lander. Okay. Here's the fact. Can I get my commissioners to pay for all that? Or is the state going to pay for all that? Who's going to pay for it? I get challenged a little bit here and there just to make that run 126 miles. But why do I do it? Is because I know I'm going to get top-notch review on this thing. I mean, I'm not saying that we're the benchmark county, but pretty much our county was run by the funeral home. So I got 10 years of records to review. You want quality? It's changed. I'm giving you not 100%, I'm giving you 1,000% Sheridan County. Okay, so
Dr. Bird, thank you for that. And yeah, they're lucky to have you. I know that many of our counties are not lucky enough to have somebody with your credentials, nor are they lucky enough to be that close to Billings, for example.
Sure.
And so, that's really what generated this conversation. Is there a way that we can do this better? Maybe not for every county, but for most of our counties, can we find something that works a little bit better? So that
totally agree.
Really appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bird, if, right now, kind of the sky's the limit for what we decide that we want to do. And I hear you on your concerns. And so if we were to say we create an office that has pathologists and funds transportation or some way to help take some of that burden off of counties, so that it's not just, hey, now you got to drive over to us and meet us where we are. I mean, it's state funded, that takes a lot of the pocketbook hopefully out of the county. I mean, is that something that then you would maybe be favorable to? Because I'm not here at least to say, okay, I don't want you to do any autopsies anymore. I don't want you to do your job. I think you're doing fine and great. What I want to do is try to help your office with capacity. I know in my county coroner gets paid $30,000. They're on call 24 hours a day.
We're on the same boat there.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that something that then feels more amenable to you?
Shouldn't be more animal for me. It should be for the other counties. And when I say the other counties, we're talking about Crook County, Weston County, the smaller counties that, you know, they're small, but if they have to go to, you know, do an autopsy, how far do they have to go? And do they have a place to go? And so for me, I was lucky. I set it up with the Montana and Dr. Willie up there. We've worked it out to where it's smooth. Now, Johnson County, my neighbor, they're only 30 miles away. I think they're utilizing the Montana medical examiner system. Okay, Park County, they're utilizing the Montana medical examiner because it's only about 120, 150 miles. The thing is that we can call that evening or next morning and get scheduled right now. And they're going to pick up another forensic pathologist somewhere, I think in August, which will make the availability to the office a lot easier. So for the coroners or for us, it's just distance, and Mother Nature. And, so.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bird. Appreciate it. Anything else, committee? Okay, Dr. Bird, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you, Senators. Thank you, Representatives. Appreciate it.
So any further public testimony? Anybody in the room want to testify? And by the way, Senator Burns, it's good to see you. I saw you sneak in the back there. I believe the senator spent 12 years while in the Wyoming Senate on this committee. So does it feel like you're back home at all?
No, I currently am not there to speak.
Okay. Any public comment waiting for us online tonight, Emily? Okay, I'll close public testimony on this topic. Committee, what's your pleasure on this one? Representative Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we get a bill draft that looks at providing a state pathologist. Maybe we start with 2 and talk about it at the next meeting to see if that makes sense. That includes whatever language that is necessary or fiscal note that also covers potentially travel for county coroner offices.
Brian, did you get all of that? I think it's worthy of further conversation. I certainly understand some of the points made by the Sheridan County coroner, but I also understand, where I grew up over on the Western Front, it's a lot tougher to get somewhere. And so, anyway, I think it's worth a continued visit. I'd rather spend the money in Wyoming than I would elsewhere, if there's a way to do it. Representative Jennings.
Mr. Chairman, could we have them also look, because I think part of the testimony was that, do we have 23 county buy-in? So could we touch bases there or somehow of, what's the actual buy-in from the counties? I mean, we would need to know that if we're going to discuss this sort of thing, I would think.
I think that's a good suggestion too, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess also if we would want to discuss a set facility or not, and I don't know what the answer is, but just if we want to discuss a facility, and what Mr. Bird's testimony made me think of too is that might not be in the just like a basic central location. Like if, let's say, the Northwest is covered and they've, Billings is doing fantastic, then maybe we look at something, again, more rural. I don't know, but I'm just saying maybe not only if we would want a facility, but also, where's the need? Where would be the closest need?
I think that's good thoughts. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that maybe we tap the Wyoming County Commissioners Association for some of this information, because there may actually be a personal stake in it for the individual county coroners. Depending upon how that medical examiner's office is developed, what responsibilities they take that come away from a county coroner. So I'm concerned that if we ask the county coroners, do you have buy-in on this idea? We may get one answer. If we ask the county commissioners, do they like the idea? We might get a different answer. And the prosecutors as well. So the county commissioners might be able to help us.
I think those are good suggestions. I think, Brian, it would be helpful for us to know alongside any draft of a bill, what are we spending now? I'd like a better idea of that. If that's possible, maybe we can get our county commissioners association to help us with that. What are we laying out every year on this deal? And just being pretty fiscally conservative, I'm interested in that. If we can spend the same amount of money and hire somebody in one of our communities to raise their families here, why wouldn't we talk about that? So anything else? All right. I think that was a day's work, committee. Cold cases. We got to go back up to cold cases. The co-chairman said, yeah, good point. Do we want to take any action on cold cases? Mr. Co-Chairman, what are your thoughts?
My thought is that one, we might want to look at where would we, if we created some type of reporting requirement to create a centralized repository for, all of the murder cases that occur in Wyoming and what their current status is. I think that's real important for us going forward, that we have some agency, and I'm looking at some people standing in the back of the room, that would likely be the place where every murder is documented, and not the whole case file, but the numbers and the status. Is it solved? Is it unsolved? I think we have to do something on that regard. And then I think my personal preference would be that we would once again encourage the Appropriations Committee to consider putting forward some funds to do a couple of things. Number one, I remember the good commander mentioned the Alice and Gerald case, and if anybody read that book, it's excellent. But at one point in that case, they can't excavate the mine where they believe the dead body to be because they don't have any money. And I would think maybe we could create a little pool of money like we do for capital case defense. And it's just, it rolls over year after year, but there's a pool of money there. And if you ever run up against a wall on a cold case investigation, you call the Attorney General, you have that discussion to justify that expenditure, but there's some money that's there. So those cases don't languish while somebody tries to, nickel and dime an investigation to go forward. So that would be one of my suggestions. I also think we should have some, a fund perhaps created that would allow the division to hire retirees back, qualified retirees back to work on a part-time basis in a cold case unit, and or fund a couple of full-time investigative positions within the division who would be dedicated to cold case investigations. Could they get pulled off for a real bona fide emergency? Sure. But, the vast majority of their work would be work on these cold cases. They wouldn't be the case agent on any other case. That'd only be their job. So I think those would be asks that I would put forward to Appropriations, and then come up with some mechanism by which we could dictate that one agency would maintain a database.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I think I heard a couple of bill drafts in there and a couple of items that would be included in communication with our Appropriations Committee. Is that right? Does that sound about right?
Well, at least one bill draft and the rest will probably go to the appropriators.
Mr. Chairman,
So Senator Case,
well, if you want appropriations to fund something, a bill draft's not a bad way because it gets it on their plate. If you just ask them to increase the budget in a certain area to create a fund that's extra above and beyond, you've been on appropriations. I'm not sure they automatically go there. That's beyond the standard budget. That's why I think a bill draft directing them in that direction. It may not go anywhere, but it may accomplish the same result.
that very good thoughts, Senator. Thank you. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and just last year during joint judiciary, we discussed an overpass for school crossings. And we kind of just said, we want this thing done and we want $10 million. And that was kind of how I think we wanted to send that message while also potentially getting some kids out of traffic.
Well, we didn't get it. Yeah, I don't think we made it all the way through with that one, did we? Yeah. Well, the Transportation Committee, I'll tell you what, that Transportation Committee got behind that. Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, before it starts getting punchy here, let's stay a little focused. I think, Mr. Co-Chairman, you did hit on at least a couple of bill drafts. I would suggest that the two positions or maybe a combination of the retired investigators and two full-timers to work on cold cases, that could be one draft. You know, your first item could be a bill draft. Just suggesting out loud. Representative Jennings, you had a thought?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just wondering because statutorily that the DCI is mandated for like 3 things. And I'm just wondering if part of that might be that we ought to look at if we want to go that way, should we make mandated and statutory change if you were going to think down those lines?
Probably something that should be looked at. Good point. Brian, have you collected all of this? Because if you had, your bucket's probably running over.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, where just on this last topic alone, my understanding is, you know, there's a request for a bill draft to require the creation of a cold case reporting system or database of cold cases. And then the second draft would be, I guess, what I would call funding options to include funding for retired peace officers to work on cold cases, and then the provision of 2 full-time positions who would be dedicated for the cold case investigations. And then, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what that leaves for a letter to JAC on this topic.
I think that to me, that covers a couple of things I think that we should consider in the second meeting, those 2 bills. The rest of that is a deeper dive and a little bit further conversation for me, and maybe to be included in some communication with our appropriations folks and the management council. But you know, good wisdom shared by the senator over here, saying that one of the best ways to get the attention of anybody is to draft a bill and take it to the appropriations committee yourself. So go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. I am intrigued by Representative Jennings' suggestion that maybe the statutory mission of the division might get tweaked a little bit with a bill draft that would accommodate the record keeping requirement of the database of the number of murders and their status in Wyoming. And you know, right now the cold case is kind of an add-on that's not defined as part of their mission, that they will work cold cases that they do. They've taken that on their own shoulders, but I just think that might be an interesting approach, and we might want to look at that statutory mission of the division and see if that's where we want to make the tweak, or do we want to make the separate standalone bill draft?
So my knee-jerk reaction, Mr. Co-Chairman, is I'd really like for our new director to have an opportunity to ponder all of this, certainly that piece, which would add to the responsibilities of that agency. I wonder if that's not a piece, you and Representative Jennings bring up a very good point here, but maybe we bring that topic to the second meeting and have a good conversation that gives our agency time to really take a look at what would it take. If we're going to stand this thing up, it's probably going to take human resource. And, you know, I guess I'd like to know more about it from that standpoint before we draft something up. Does that make sense? Anybody else? Okay. So, you know, Brian, if you just write that down as something that I think would carry to the second meeting for a good conversation, get a report back from our friends at DCI. You know, what would it take to do this? Both initially and ongoing. I think that would be worth knowing. And we still would have time if we wanted to draft an additional one up. We do have to be a little careful, committee, in my opinion, of how many bills we take forward. But some of these bills, if we don't carry them as a committee, each one of us can grab one. Oh, further thoughts on the cold cases? Anything else? Anything else? Okay, Brian, any final thoughts of the day?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just you know, with apologies for any confusion, the memorandum that was prepared on the cold cases, that was a memo prepared at the request of the co-chairman of the committee as an informational piece only, which our memoranda generally are. And I just wanted to just reiterate and emphasize that, you know, LSO takes no position on any sort of policy question, whether there should or should not be a statewide medical examiner. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
We do a little pizza thing. Oh, thank you. Email box. Okay, we have an email in our email boxes, everyone on the committee, courtesy of a good representative here in town, Representative Western, who has kind of arranged for a place to gather and have a beverage and a piece of pizza. So you have that message in your inbox. And so we could gather a little bit later and reminisce about the times we've missed. What do you think? So great day's work, committee. Thank you for, I thought it was really educational. Pardon me? I think it's now. Yeah.
So later is real short.
Yeah, later is shortly. Yeah. Representative Oakley. Okay. Okay. Very good. So committee, anything else for the good of the cause? We'll see you back here at 8:30 in the morning. The good